guys ready for your match? Check, check.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay. Secretary Noble?
President Price, I am hoping that we can discuss item D on the consent agenda at the earliest time, though it will probably make sense to do it after public forum. So if we can have that at the top of, well, really, I think we could do the consent agenda for the other items and then discuss item D.
So we're going to move it from D to D up to the first under consent. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
And a second?
No. I have a question.
Can I have a second first? I second.
Why is any of this consent? This is all action. Why is any of this titled as consent?
Because consent is an action item.
Well, I know that, but all of these are typically all of our second readings. In 7 years, I think this is the first time I've ever seen second readings under consent as opposed to action.
It's just...
In that case, I'd like to pull all of them off individually for discussion and individual vote. Because consent is usually taken as a block.
We don't have to. We can take them one at a time. This is a study session.
Great.
We can relax a little bit.
And
here.
I thought you were going to take one off anyway.
Okay, but I'd like to move or have it was just the board's acknowledgement that we're going to vote on and discuss each of these individually.
Yes, that's what
Great.
we always do, yeah. Okay. Are there any board announcements? First, I'd like to have the interpreter, Ms. Bejar.
Good evening, Superintendent, board members, audience. My name is Alma Bejar. I will be doing the translation services in Spanish. Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Alma Bejar. Voy a hacer las traducciones en español. Si gustan mi asistencia, voy a estar hacia atrás. Gracias.
Okay, first of all, let's vote on the agenda, which we had just moved one thing. All in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, under board announcements, I would just like to say that I want to talk to and speak to all of the members of the people who work for the Santa Fe Public Schools. Often we hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, but we don't hear the good. And so I want to thank everyone who works for the Santa Fe Public Schools. Your work is appreciated more than you will ever know. And that includes bus drivers, people who work in the cafeteria, secretaries, teachers, EAs, principals, middle management, senior cabinet, and Dr. Garcia. I just want you all to know how much you are appreciated in the city of Santa Fe and the county of Santa Fe. Thank you. And any other comments? Any other board announcements? All right. On. Yes. Board Member Garcia.
Thank you. I'd actually just like to reiterate what you just said, too, about the entire staff. Thank you for bringing that forward. I also would like to congratulate the ROTC team. The ROTC team actually went to, I believe, the entire Western Finals, and they actually took, I believe, first or second place. So I think the public schools should actually come forward and bring them and congratulate them some way, somehow, if we can put that on there. And congratulations to ROTC. Appreciate that. Thank you.
There actually, we have 4 national champions, so it was beyond the regional competition. And so we will have them at the next board meeting.
Thank you. Any other board announcements? Well, let's move on to superintendent announcements.
I'm going to make this brief because I will do a wrap-up next Tuesday, but House Bill 98 with the joint elections is still in play, as I understand it, and pending Senate rules. Our lobbyist has been working, against this bill. This bill will really, I think, hurt the Santa Fe Public Schools. Will share more of the burden in terms of the cost of elections. And so, if you want to talk to your representatives or senators, right now it's on the Senate side because it did pass the House, and that is House Bill 98 on the joint elections.
House Bill 98. Thank you. Board Member Garcia.
Superintendent, do we know how many committees that's assigned to on the Senate side?
It's right now pending Senate rules.
And that's the only committee it has?
The rule assignment, we only have 2 days left, but I don't know the rest of the assignments.
Thank you.
So does that complete your?
That completes my announcements.
All right, moving on to public forum.
On legislative update, I don't recall getting an email as to when it's the joint memorial was going to Senate Finance.
That's, Madam President, members of the board, that's probably because it hasn't been scheduled. As soon as we find out, it could happen tonight, it could be at 10 o'clock tonight, they could do it in the lounge. There's no way of knowing right now. Things are moving very quickly. Have you received an email, Mr. Grunler? So as soon as we know, I will text or I'll email the board.
Even if it's a nighttime meeting, if you could just make sure.
As soon as I find out, I know that you wanted to be alerted.
All right, thank you.
Moving on to public forum, Mr. Grumler.
Madam President, we have 4 speakers this evening.
Do you need me to give you the statement?
The ground rules for public forum are as follows.
We have them in our book.
Please listen and speak with respect. No uncivil conduct will be permitted. Please do not discuss any specific student who is not your own. No sharing of time. Self-monitor and observe the 3-minute time limit. I'll give you a 30-second warning when your time is almost up. Public commentary and dialogue is allowed only during the public forum, not throughout the meeting. Please search for answers on common ground. You may speak on any topic, whether it's on the agenda or not. Your input will be taken into consideration. Please be advised that the board may discuss your issue during the meeting, but by law, the board cannot take action on an item that is not on the agenda. Madam President, our speakers tonight are Kate Mitchell, Nicole Ammerman, Haley and Loga Ammerman, and Roberto Rodas, if you'd come up here for public forum.
You'll be given 3 minutes. You can have a seat there. And please give us your name.
Hello, Superintendent Garcia and board members. My name is Nicole Ammerman, and I am a Santa Fe Public School alum of E.J. Martinez, Capshot, and Santa Fe High. Most importantly, I am the mother of Haley Ammerman, who's a 9th grader at Mandela, and Logan, who is in 6th grade. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to you for supporting this wonderful school. I have personally witnessed Dr. Garcia and the Santa Fe Public Schools team effort and commitment to Mandela. Recently, you were incredibly responsive to our school's needs. It was handled thoughtfully and quickly with a wonderful outcome for our school, so thank you so much. I believe it is important for Mandela to retain the sibling preference policy. School is a child's second home, and ours is a family. Younger children look up to their siblings and aspire to do what they do, just as they do with their parents. If you look at research around the country, sibling preference is the norm. In fact, it's the norm here in Santa Fe as well. ATC and Monte del Sol both use a lottery system like Mandela does and have sibling preference. In fact, there's sibling preference given within the Santa Fe's public schools because it's weighted for siblings with interzone transfers. This means that Mandela would be the only school in Santa Fe with no sibling preference. Mandela is a newer school, and we are trying to create our community, and I really believe that family is an important part of a community. Keeping siblings at the same school focuses parents' energies on one school, one set of practices, and one school culture. Parents with children in separate schools have to choose which event to attend or which school to contribute to in various ways. Let the family stay together, then parents can give 100% to one school. I grew up here in Santa Fe, and there have always been the St. Mike's families, the Santa Fe High families, the Prep families, and more recently the ATC families. I want the opportunity to be a proud Mandela family. So I'm deeply involved in fundraising for Mandela, and in fact, we're in the works on planning the next fundraiser, but it's hard for me to get excited to do this for the school if my son cannot be part of the school. Sibling preference keeps families together and promotes school stability, strength, and success. I urge you to reverse the vote that was passed last Tuesday. Thank you so much for all you do.
Am I supposed to state my name?
Yes.
Okay. My name is, we'll get there. Good evening, Superintendent Garcia, board members Price, Cashman, Garcia, Noble, and Carrillo. My name is Kate Mitchell. I'm the proud parent of a Mandela 8th grader, Ethan, and a current Santa Fe Public School 6th grader, Lily. I was born and raised in Santa Fe, and at the risk of dating myself, when I was getting ready to enter 7th grade, there were just 3 schools of choice other than one's neighborhood middle school. Now there are more than 10 schools of choice, and while that variety is welcome, it is also a rather daunting prospect for a parent of a soon-to-be middle schooler. When Ethan was in 6th grade, we were determined to find the best fit for our son, and as such, we did our due diligence. We went to 7th grade options night. We went to over half a dozen open houses. Ethan did shadow days at a few schools. He did interviews and took placement tests at private schools. We filled out financial aid forms and completed admission applications. We entered the lotteries for ATC, Monte del Sol, and Mandela. All in all, it was very time-consuming, though rewarding. Exercise as we experienced firsthand all the educational options Santa Fe offers its youth. As good luck would have it, Ethan was chosen in both the Monte del Sol and Mandela lotteries. After a lengthy discussion as to the pros and cons of public versus private school education, my husband and I decided that the best fit for Ethan was at Mandela. The high academic expectations, coupled with the emphasis on becoming an aware, contributing global citizen, were perfect for Ethan. As both Monte del Sol and Mandela allowed for automatic sibling entry, we were confident in our decision for Ethan to attend Mandela. This leads me to why I'm speaking today. Why would you as a board vote to approve the change to the Mandela lottery so that we would be the only school in the district to not give preference to siblings during the admission process? And why would you do it so late in the lottery season and middle school application process? I've heard the word fair being bandied about these last few weeks with regard to the Mandela lottery. You have successfully voted to make Mandela's lottery the same as ATC's and Monte del Sol's in terms of entry, no longer being based upon a finite number of kids from each school zone. The fact that you have singled out Mandela in terms of the automatic sibling entry policy is not fair. Had we known that Mandela's sibling policy would be overturned sometime down the road, we likely would have opted to send our son to the second choice, Monte del Sol. If I had known such a decision would be made this year, I would have planned better for an alternative to Mandela for our sixth grader, Lily. As it stands now, the financial aid deadline, as well as the placement tests and interview dates at St. Mike's have passed. The Santa Fe School for the Arts and Sciences financial aid and admission application is due the day after tomorrow. In light of the news of your February 6th vote, while not guaranteed, I entered the lotteries for both ATC and Monte del Sol as their deadlines are on the 6th, 17th, and 18th respectively. While I'm sure you had the best intentions when you overturned the automatic sibling entry policy at Mandela, the ramifications of such decision will not be positive. As with all schools, we at Mandela wish to build a strong school community. Such a community arises when you have fully invested families. It comes when possible from older siblings serving as mentors and providing in-school support for their younger siblings. Okay. Mandela deserves to be afforded the same lottery admission policy as both Monte and ATC, excuse me, when it comes to siblings, and as such, I graciously ask that you overturn your vote from February 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent and board members. My name is Logan Ammerman, and I am in 6th grade. I've been excited to attend Mandela for the last 2 years. This year, I have watched my friends go to open houses and shadow days so that they could decide where they wanted to go for 7th grade. I didn't do this because I did not think I had to. I was going to Mandela, that's what I thought. I do not know where I will go if I don't go to Mandela, and I hope you will rethink your sibling policy. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Haley Ammerman, and this is my 3rd year at Mandela. First off, I would like to thank the board and superintendent for all that you've done for my school this year. Going to this school has given me an entire new outlook on learning whilst helping me build my social skills. My brother, Logan Ammerman, is currently a 6th grader. My brother and I have not been in the same school together since we attended Chaparral Elementary School 3 years ago. Ever since I started at Mandela, my family and I have anticipated Logan joining me starting his 7th grade year. During every math project, every science unit, English essay, and other projects that I have had, I've been thinking about the future and how it would help Logan with these same projects. I've had to experience many difficult social interactions during my time at Mandela, and I would have personally loved to have an older sibling here to guide me through them. Although I could not have that, I was excited that I would be able to be that helping hand for my little brother when he had to go through similar situations. My brother is my best friend, and going to school with him and sharing a high school experience together is something that I have been looking forward to for a long time. Please reconsider the decision you've made, as it deeply affects many families like my own. Thank you.
President Price, that concludes our speakers for this evening.
Thank you. Moving on to consent, we're going to start with D, the second reading approval of policy 627, Mandela International Magnet School Admissions Policy. That's 5D.
Oh, I'd like to, if I may, Madam President, invite the principal of Mandela, Alan Scarola, if he has any questions for him or anything. He's going to join staff at the table. I think there's room for both of you. Lisa, you can still stay up there.
Board Member Carrillo.
Was all of them going to make a statement first, or?
No, he's just joining us.
Just be available? Then, if I could begin discussion, is that all right?
Well,
Great.
let's get a motion and a second, and then.
Well, I don't think,
Excuse me? Are you going to talk about?
I could talk about the amendments I handed, or if Mr. Carrillo wants to make a motion to amend.
no, I don't, I mean, I don't think, we don't have to, I mean, sometimes we make motions right away on, on policies because we've read them ad nauseum and it almost becomes procedural. But in this case, I think it warrants having discussion first, and maybe, and then at such time it is appropriate then to make a motion. So I just wanted to start with discussion, if that's okay with you.
It's okay with me. I fail to see the difference, but it's okay with me.
A motion locks us in more.
Yes and no. But go ahead.
Okay. So for me, I'd like to say that I believe that I acted hastily and made a mistake last Tuesday. And I can say that because of the emails and phone calls that I got on Wednesday and Thursday. And I think that I can't speak for the board, of course, but given the nature of the discussion, and it's all on videotape, I mean, what we may have been trying to do was in the right place relative to this idea of everybody, absolutely everybody, having an equal chance to get in to every school and not any seat at any point being reserved for someone. And maybe, but that I think was, I don't think we took into account Mandela and then also the fact the policies we have, or took into account enough the nature of Mandela and the policies that we have currently relative to ATC and Monte. So, I mean, and then in speaking with so many parents and reading their emails and calling them and speaking with a couple of students, it became very clear to me that that Mandela should have the same policy that Monte and ATC have, and that is sibling preference. And given the numbers, I don't think it's as though we're going to displace an inordinate number of people, or even, my sense is we're not going to displace anyone. And I would want to see data that would say that that would be the case. But I would say that I support us in the second reading coming up with a new language that keeps the current policy of accepting SIBs and preference for SIBs in place.
I think we need to state that we have no governing responsibility over Monte del Sol. We could be fair and tell ATC that they cannot do automatic sibling. That's another way, acceptance. That's another way of straightening this out. We were given an argument that otherwise I would have voted differently. We were given an argument that this was about equality.
I need to clarify something, and I apologize. There was a lot of miscommunication from board review on to what staff thought the board wanted, to I was not there for board review that time when I was in Arizona, and some things got mixed up, and I'm just going to put that out there. This got messed up in some ways, and it was the intent of, some board members feel very strongly that it shouldn't have a SIB rule. But, so let me just clarify. You all took the action on the lottery to make sure that every district had the same opportunity, and we had that discussion and debate, and you passed that. Subsequently, and I think part of the reason that you went through them quickly, it appeared it was cleanup language, right, on the first reading for these 4 policies to get you in line with the lottery. What I noted that I had received, I think you asked me how many calls, I said about 5 calls, that there were people concerned about the SIB policy. Mr. Carrillo is absolutely right. Since that action on Tuesday, we have heard from the principal, from lots of people, the concern and the argument about why we needed to not have messed with the SIB policy. You all never took action on the SIB policy. This was thrown in for the first reading, because the action that you took was just to take away the differentiated lottery. So it really was an error. It really shouldn't have even come, but it did. And I don't think we had a lot of discussion about it. And so, now there's an opportunity to fix it. It's up to the board. I know that there's mixed feelings about the SIB policy, and you all have to represent your constituencies. The point that I would make is the following. The charters cannot have any kind of differentiated lottery, but the state governs in terms of the regulations, how kids get in the preferences. And that is true for us. Also, we have a lottery on interzones. Let's take charters out of it. Let's talk about just plain old interzones. When we have more kids, we always do, for spots in our schools, they also go through a lottery, and the SIB preference also kicks in there. So the SIB preference is in reg, and it applies to when there are more people that want seats. So the first recommendation of staff, and I think Mr. Carrillo mentioned it, but I will just state it. If you go to the first piece of paper that I gave you, if you look at this policy 627, it reads on line 18, after 22-14E, strike the remainder of the sentence and insert in lieu thereof a period. That is one option that will make this lottery like any other lottery, and that would be the staff recommendation. We did provide a second proposed amendment, and that was to grandfather all of those students who are in Mandela, who until they graduate, that their SIBs could go there. So our preference is for number one. We moved to make a Mandela very much like the other lotteries, and we would recommend that we just keep it consistent and not operate differently with this school in terms of SIB policies. And I think the people that spoke at public forum, I think, made the case why we should reconsider and on the second reading, which is why I guess it's good to have two readings on a policy, because I think these things come up, unintended consequences and whatnot. So I just want to clarify that, and I apologize for the confusion that this has caused.
Secretary Noble?
Thank you very much for that, Superintendent. I appreciate the recreation of what happened, so that because it has been a little bit confusing to me. And just to be crystal clear on the two amendments we have on the table, the reason that staff is recommending amendment number 1 is that it would leave the sibling policy in administrative guidelines rather than...
NAR is not policy.
But this is policy.
This would be policy.
This is policy, and then RAR would just follow this policy.
And that would be consistent with the school, but both amendment number 1 and amendment number 2 get to the same end. It's just amendment number 2 inserts the language directly into our policy.
No, no. They are both amendments to policy. The main difference between the short version and the long version, the short version just makes this lottery like any other lottery in our district and allows for the SIB rule. The second one creates a SIB rule that is time limited. It grandfathers in anyone who is currently related to someone who is enrolled in Mandela. So this is time limited and is differentiated, right, than the others. That's why we recommend policy 1 that just makes it like any other lottery.
Okay. Thank you.
Not policy 1, but the shorter version.
Amendment number 1. Because, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you saying, and I was thinking as we came in, this is why we have 2 readings, and I appreciate the opportunity to clear things up.
Vice President Cashman.
I appreciate your recollection of the meeting, but I have a different recollection of the meeting. When we made the changes to the lottery, one of the things, and I clearly brought up the SIB policy, and I said I didn't think changing the lottery was fair to each one of the districts. Mandela was formulated based on each district having a portion of representation based on the number of 6th graders they had within their district. So it doesn't mean that each one of us has 10 seats. It's based on how many 6th graders you have to give those 6th graders equal representation no matter where you live in the district. I was against changing the lottery rules, and I said if we were going to change the lottery rules, then I think it's also good to change the sibling preference. That's my recollection of the meeting when we amended or changed the lottery for Mandela. I guess how I feel about it, and I do have strong feelings about this, with the school that has a limited amount of seats and a lot of people wanting to go there, I think by adding siblings, then it's not equal representation. I would be willing for this, and this is just my personal preference, I would be willing to go through, continue, and suspend and allow siblings for this one time. I think I've talked with you that I want to know when that lottery takes place how that distribution is among districts. We know that some districts have a lot of parents applying for various reasons, other districts don't. But the whole premise behind Mandela was to make it look like what our district looks like. So it's equitable and fair to everyone, no matter what zip code you're living in and what district. So I don't think the lottery is going to work out. I mean, I appreciate staff being very positive that it's going to work out and everybody's going to have representation, but I would find it hard if everyone in District 2 got into Mandela, and District 2 is my district, and none of the other districts had other people in there, or just a smattering of people. There are limited amounts of slots. 50 is not that many kids. We know that we have a lot of sixth graders in some of our districts compared to other districts. And so I guess I would maybe say for one time we go ahead, we allow siblings, but I feel then we need to revisit the lottery process. That's it's up to the board, but that's my preference. I will agree with Board Member Price. Monte del Sol is not our school. It is a state charter school. It is not a public school that has been chartered. I even think we should revisit ATC's policy as far as when we have small schools that have limited amounts of seats. I think we need to be fair to whether you have one kid or whether you have 40 kids in a family. It's quickly that we could have some siblings that use up all of those preferences. So that's where I stand.
I was convinced to vote for having the open lottery because I was convinced by the argument that it was a question of equality. I don't see this as a question of equality. I see this as a question of preference. And I feel very uncomfortable that I was put in that position where I voted for that. And so this is supposed to be equal, that because your brother is in the school, you get to go to the school? That's what they do in large private schools that are Ivy League. They call that legacy placement. I don't see that as equal. Board Member Carrillo.
First, I understand your points, Maureen. I would say the purpose of Mandela had nothing to do with last week's vote or being like a tapestry of Santa Fe. The purpose of opening an IB magnet school was to have a school of choice in Santa Fe, have it be an IB school, have it have a pedagogy that was significantly different than the other schools. I would say that was the purpose of behind Mandela, and that being different from the vote last week. And I know that our, you know, I remember, it was a study session actually. I remember sitting right here, because I'm very attached to my seat here and there, having the discussion around the lottery being by district, right? That the intent of that really was to try to have more of a look of what Santa Fe is. And then we discussed how the unintended consequence of that was it wasn't really fair because in some districts it was just basically shutting them out because of their zip code. And so that's why, you know, and I agree with you, you know, President Price, in terms of the way it was handled last week. And I'm really glad we have second readings, and this is why, right? So we can fix things. But that's what I remember. It was really about creating a school of choice. I feel very strongly about not breaking up families. You know, I was a legacy kid at Loyola High School in Los Angeles. My brother got accepted, and the only reason they accepted me, it was going at the same time. I was in 9th grade, he was going to be in 11th or something. And he stayed at Fairfax High School because he was Mr. Popular and straight A person. The only reason they accepted me was because I was his brother, because I did not have the grades or anything. I'm very glad they did. I'm very glad we went to different high schools so I could find out who I was without being in his shadow. But in this case, I think it's very important, you know, to keep our families together. That builds the culture of a school. We see how that really works at all of our elementaries. When kids are together and parents are involved, because the kids are all at one school, it means typically where there's greater parent involvement, there's greater success in the school and in the home for those kids. So I think this would forward that. I would also be curious, because otherwise it's just going to start getting redundant. I'd be curious as to what the principal, if it's okay with the superintendent and the president, how the principal feels about this.
President who?
President, you.
Oh. Like President Price?
President Price. I mean, I can't call on him. I'm supposed to, you know.
Yes.
Thank you, President Price and board members. First of all, I should say that I am proud to be given the challenge to be the principal of Mandela. And a big portion of the reason I took that job on is because I believe in the mission and the vision of the School of Mandela. And part of that vision really has to do with what Tony had in mind, which was a slice of what Santa Fe looks like. And that's something that I would like to continue with. I did not come to the board meeting where you guys talked about the lottery because that wasn't my push. What I wanted, and I was consulted with originally, was simply to make sure that we had as much equal access as possible. And I was about 2 days in on the job and didn't want to draw a line in the sand because I wasn't sure how I felt about it until Carlos Romero, who had run a numerous sessions around what this would look like if we opened up the lottery. So with that
just to clarify, Carlos Martinez, you mean?
Sorry, there's Martinez. I don't know why I email, I think it's Romero. Thank you. After that discussion, I was convinced that it would be equal access to our students in Santa Fe. To the point of the siblings in the lottery and taking away the equal access, the way I see it is actually without, now that we've opened up the lottery, that we would no longer be shutting down equal access for students because of siblings, because all the slots that would be available would be equal access to the rest of Santa Fe community. I also don't think that what we're looking at, President Price, I agree with you, this is not about equal access. This is about community building. This is about creating a healthy, vibrant school. And when I look at it from the principal's standpoint, I don't know how to create a healthy community and a vibrant school without families in those schools. You know, the schools that I've been in have long cultural histories, and those are familial histories. When I look at Santa Fe in general, it's hard for me to imagine running the only school in town that doesn't have a history of families in them. Without siblings, without families who are dedicated to the school, I want it to stay to look like the swath of Santa Fe. That is a goal of mine. But at the same time, you know, schools are built on culture, and we need to promote that culture. The other aspect that I have is I need to attract families. That's part of my job. And when I look at competition, when it comes to the other schools of choice in town, if I'm the only school in town that doesn't have a siblings of choice, I know I have 2 kids. I have a 10th grader who I want to come to Mandela in 2 years, and then I have a 6-year-old. And they're wide apart, but they would actually overlap. I've literally thought about this myself. They would overlap at that school. It would give me pause sending my child to my own school if I couldn't guarantee that the sibling was going to go there as well. So I feel like I'm fighting up against, I would be fighting up against other schools and on an unbalanced system where they have something to offer that I don't have to offer anymore. So I ask you to revisit this. I feel strongly about revisiting this. I want to thank all of the families here that came in support of it, and I know that a lot more would have as well. So, yes, thank you.
On the one point that I want to clarify, and I think we both are in agreement, it's like, let's think of ECO. And we have kids working on cars, we have kids on lathes making pens, we have kids building houses. If a child is in that school and it's like, I don't want to get under a car, and I don't want to hold a hammer, and I don't want to use a power drill, that's not the right school for you. It just isn't, because the focus is that. So with the sibling rule, though, I don't know if you would have stayed at Mandela with what you're describing, but with the sibling rule, there is an expectation, though, that you're going to work hard, that you're going to meet a certain level of rigor. Yeah, you're going to work with the kids, and you're going to be the best to pull them, but it's not an automatic, just like any child who gets in there. There is an expectation for being able to do the work, just like there's an expectation that you're going to be, it's like being in the medical pathway but not wanting to draw blood. I mean, each one of these has a focus for the school. And so while the sibling rule is great, if a child has an inclination that they're not interested in that sort of curriculum or what's being offered, it wouldn't be a good match, and I think you would work through that. So, you know, while they do get in, it also, there is an expectation that you're going to be able, that you're going to choose to do the work, just like in a medical pathway or ECO or any of our other career pathways or opportunities that we have in our district.
Vice President Cashman.
I'll just make one last comment on this. I would beg to differ with families that say if my child goes to one school and another one goes to another school, that I'm not going to be involved. I have 2 daughters right now attending 2 different schools, and I am heavily involved in both of those schools. It matters to me, education, and it doesn't matter where my daughters go to school. I think that if I had one child in elementary school and one child in middle school, I would still be heavily involved in both of those schools. I think those comments are a false choice. Does it make it more convenient if they're at both schools? Sure. But I don't think that if you have children at different schools, you're going to still be heavily involved. I would say that the parents that came up and talked, I respect what you said, but I'm sure you're heavily involved in both Mandela and the elementary school. And I wish we had every parent that was heavily involved in all of our schools. We do believe families are important to our schools. So I just want to make that comment and not let it stand, that you can be heavily involved in the schools where your kids are, whether it's in elementary school, middle school, or high school, and you can have multiple children in those various things and still be involved parents.
May I just very briefly? I agree that you can be involved in both schools. I think that community isn't just about parent involvement, it's also about just having families involved or siblings involved in the school. But I'd also say that of families with fewer resources, it becomes more difficult for those families with fewer resources to spread them out amongst more than one school.
I just want to remind some people that I had two grandsons who live off of Highway 14, who could not get into Turquoise Trail because they did not get their lottery choice. And so they were bused into town to Nava. One went to Nava, and one went to Laragoite Elementary. Nobody gave a damn. Then one got into Turquoise, and the other one had to continue at his elementary school until the following year when, just as in a regular lottery, he got in, and so both of them were in Turquoise Trail. If it's good enough for some, it's good enough for others. I think we make distinctions in this town that aggravate me, that are unfair, and that lean towards certain populations and not towards others. I put 20 years into this school district. 30 years I've been working on this. 30 years. May I have a motion, please? Board Member Carrillo?
I move that we accept the language for Policy 627 with the proposed Amendment 1, which says, basically striking the remainder of the sentence and inserting in lieu thereof a period. The only thing I'd like to add to it, because I heard Ms. Cashman's concern, I'd like us for at least a couple of years to monitor the lottery for Mandela, so we can kind of see what's going on throughout the whole district, just to get a sense of who's applying and wherever they're from and everything else. But otherwise, I make that motion.
Do I have a second? All right, let's have a roll call. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it would be an amendment. You have proposed Amendment 1, so I would say, and in the next 3 years, monitor the lottery process. Monitor the numbers of the lottery process. That's all I'd probably add. Is that fine? You know, microphone.
Do you have a speaker? Mike?
Board President Price, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia, Member Carrillo. You have the prerogative to do that anyway and to direct staff to do that anyway.
Okay. Great. In that case, I won't put it in the language because it'll complicate things.
I do.
So just as is, adding proposed Amendment 1.
Board Member Garcia?
Since we're actually since we're on discussion right now, I guess I just got to give a little bit of my personal opinion. I'm just a little disappointed that we're here at this time, at this hour.
Would you talk right into your mic?
Because the lottery is actually happening, so I'm actually like the principal, which is very new here to this policy that came in this last month here. This is what we're actually reading and have to make a decision on all the stuff that's redlined and underlined. So I'm still a little bit concerned about the district that I represent and make sure that it actually does have the proper representation. So I'm not too sure of whether Amendment number 1 or Amendment number 2 is better, so I'm going to vote what I think is right.
But may I clarify something? That
Sure.
The board voted, I think you abstained, but the board voted on...
He voted no.
I thought you abstained, didn't you, or did you vote no?
He voted no.
Well, I don't know, I'm asking him.
Let's take a vote on what I voted.
He said no because he didn't understand.
Oh, okay. So anyway, the first vote, the board voted on the lottery, just the non-segmented lottery.
So just
And I guess we could go back to the minutes, we have differences of opinion about what happened, but nonetheless, we are where we are right now. And the second piece is that so all that's read and marked in here, most of it they had already voted on, correct? That's not new. The only piece that really we're voting on today is whether or not to remove the sibling rule. All the other stuff that's in red, Board Member Garcia, you already voted on. So it really shouldn't have been in red. The piece that you're really voting on is just the sibling rule that was removed in the first reading, and now this puts it back in. So that's the only issue that you're voting on in this motion right now.
Superintendent, actually, motion number 1 actually gives us a sibling rule back in, and proposed amendment number 2 grandfathers, am I correct?
Correct.
And also, the way he amended it, Board Member Carrillo, it's for 3 years.
Oh, I withdrew that.
He withdrew
Oh, you
that.
didn't do, oh, you said not
On
to.
the advice of council, I withdrew that.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that, sorry. Board Member Carrillo.
So then also in discussion, one of the things I think we need to take into consideration is when we have recommendations from staff. And so we have a recommendation from staff, and we have to assume that they're also looking out for the best interests of kids and families in the district. Recommendation from staff is to put the SIB rule back in and have proposed amendment 1. Recommendation from the principal is to put the SIBs in, have recommendation amendment number 1. I think it'd be really presumptuous of us as a board to not, in this case, take the advice of staff and the advice of the principal in this matter.
I'll remind you of that the next time you vote against.
There are times when I feel strongly about something, but in this case, absolutely.
Vice President Cashman.
And I would just reiterate what what President Price said. I've been on both sides where I've supported staff and the superintendent's recommendation, and there are some issues that I don't support, but I don't think I would consider any board member presumptuous based on what they feel is the best for their district and the entire school district. Board Member Carrillo.
Thank you. Secretary Noble.
Thank you, President Price, and I really appreciate the comments of the principal here and the recommendations of staff, and I agree with Board Member Carrillo that we do have to listen and understand, and though not always necessarily take the advice of the staff, I think we've had a very clear explanation about the importance of families in building the culture of a school. We have a clear recommendation from the staff and the superintendent, and I will be supporting amendment number 1.
Just really quick.
Did you?
Board Member Garcia.
Just really quick, I thought staff's recommendation last time was to go against this, and now staff's for it.
Actually,
so
at the board
confused.
meeting, I mentioned to you that there had been concerns, but it was a quick meeting. It was, people had already done a first read. I don't, people asked me how many, and I gave the answer that was the fact that I had at the time was 5. And so, perhaps you felt like, oh, well, 5, it's probably not that big of a deal. There was never a motion or a directive from the entire board that the sibling rule be changed, is my understanding. I think that this was a discussion, it's my understanding, I don't remember it from the board meeting, but that aside, I did bring it up. Perhaps I could have been more forceful. But from the time, and that's why I think first readings and second readings are important, from the time of the first reading vote, more than 5, I've become very aware of the hardship that this is causing families. And as I look at it, I agree. I think that this is not good for families, and for all the reasons stated, it's no point in repeating it. I recommend that. I don't think, and I think we have I feel very good about my relationship with the board. I don't take no votes personally. I don't take yes votes personally. You hire me to give you my best advice. You have constituencies that you represent. I do my best to answer your questions, and then you vote your conscience. It's no hard feelings for me. But, I try to give you my best advice based on the information I have at the time. And when there are missteps, I'll try to admit them, and this was a misstep on this particular vote. but we're trying to fix it. And that's what the second reading gives us the opportunity to do. And I do apologize to you for the confusion.
Board Member Garcia?
So really quick, Superintendent, so if this wasn't actually, if the sibling thing was not noted at the last meeting, then I guess I'd like to ask an opinion of legal. Was it actually addressed at the last meeting on the last vote, or we shouldn't even have to be here because it was or wasn't addressed?
Board President Price, members of the board, Member Garcia, Superintendent Garcia. It was technically in the first reading, but it wasn't fully vetted during board review, is the most succinctly I can put that.
It was presented in, well, I think you all talked about it in one board review, I think. I don't know that it was discussed in depth with everybody. I wasn't there. But your reading, this was in there. So this isn't the first time that you're seeing the SIB rule, this policy with the SIB rule. The SIB rule was in there. I did mention it to you that there was a concern, and you guys asked me how many parents. I said 5, because that's what I had heard from. And I think probably the sentiment of the board was 5 doesn't sound like that many. You don't have any policy that's universally loved by your communities. So I can't read your minds, but my guess is you probably thought 5 wasn't that much. Some of you were just against the SIB rule anyway. So there we were. So since that time, this is what happened. But it was in there. That's what they voted for, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
To remove the siblings?
Yes.
To not have sibling preference?
Correct.
And
Vice President Cashman?
I think just for clarification, the sibling issue came up during changing the lottery process. And at that time, I specifically said, if we are going to go with a district-wide open lottery process, then I think we need to address that siblings should not have preference. And I remember some staff agreeing with that if we're going to do, because then that, so it was not in the last meeting we had on the readings. It was in the process on discussing whether the lottery should be, when Mr. Martinez was explaining a change that the district felt was appropriate for the lottery process.
On that point, Madam President, and that I do remember that, you are correct. Where the problem is, and this is why we've put possible action, you all have different opinions on different things. And unfortunately, staff took that as a directive. You did not vote as an entire board to remove the sibling policy. That's why I guess it was brought back to you to vote on it. So here we are, okay? You might have had an idea, somebody else has another idea. This happens all the time. But as you recall, it's only as an entire board that changes. We didn't even get a directive from the entire board to put that change and bring that back. But staff interpreted it as something that the board wanted.
Board Member Carrillo.
So my recollection is the same as Maureen's. We discussed it, but it was not in the language. Mm-hmm. Okay?
No, the lottery, you're right.
Right.
It was
So
not
we
there.
discussed, the whole sibling thing came up. I remember it.
It was in the AR.
Right. But we didn't have the AR in front of us. So, but we discussed it.
Yes, we did.
Okay, but it was discussed, but it was not in the language of the policy. So we can kind of fix it tonight. And, obviously that's what I'm in favor of doing. And there's 2 other, things will keep coming to mind as long as we keep doing this. This is, I see this as a kid-family issue. One of the times where we can put kids and families first in, not one of the times, because we put kids and families first pretty much every time we're in this room. But I'm really paying attention to what we've heard from our families and from our students around keeping families together, and then having a policy that's the same as ATC in Monte, and not being the only school in Santa Fe that does not recognize the sibling, you call it legacy, but the siblings following their others as being a priority. And then, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rudy, the the trepidation that I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of making sure that in terms of representing your district, that this is a fair thing to do. And that's why you're up here, to represent your district. But I would say that the way that we can make sure that that the concerns of families in your district are represented is when we do visit the numbers after every lottery to say, hey, what's going on here? Is this out of whack? Do we need to tweak something? Because I wouldn't want to let that hold up something that I think is really important for the families at Mandela and families just in general in Santa Fe.
I would like to point out again, Monte del Sol is not under our jurisdiction, and that we can also revisit ATC's policy, because they are.
No, well, in that,
Board
if I could
Member
comment.
Garcia.
Can I comment on what you?
Board Member Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President. I just have a couple of questions just to ease my mind here. Thank you for the couple of the two families that showed up and spoke tonight. Appreciate that, especially the young kids that actually did come forward. You guys did an excellent job. So when we have interzone transfers into public schools, do we have a lottery type system, and how does that work? Are siblings preferenced?
It is in statute, siblings are preferenced, which is why in my opening statement I said that I would just like Mandela to be treated like our other schools.
All right, let's, Board Member Noble.
So I appreciate that we have sorted out somewhat what happened, and I remember it the same as Vice President Cashman and Board Member Carrillo, that first we voted to change the lottery and remove the district weighting that we had, and then we voted on the first reading of this policy, which included specifically language about no enrollment preferences. And what I didn't know at the time is what we just discussed and the superintendent just mentioned, is that we would be creating a completely unique system to not have the sibling preference. And so again, I appreciate that we have a second reading and can work on this again.
Vice President Cashman.
And I would just remind my fellow board members, I think I know where the vote is, so we might, but I would just remind us that every school we have in this district is a school that is zoned by neighborhoods or by swaths of land. Mandela is the only school that we have, with the exception of ATC, that is not zoned for a particular boundary. So Mandela is different from all of our other schools, and it is a school of choice. But I also know we have a lot of kids that want to go to other schools, and they cannot get into those schools. So, and Board Member Correa will say, here goes Ms. Cashman again, choice is only available if you have transportation and you have resources to get there. I'm glad that we're having Mandela. I have spoken with the superintendent, and she knows I have concerns. This is an IB school. How many of our students are following that IB curriculum? There. And I think we know that we aren't going to be graduating every one of those kids that go there with an IB degree. So but I think we've got a vote on the table. This is a little bit out of whack, because we usually have our discussion and we have a vote. I think if Board Member Garcia needs to have a few minutes to think about it, we could go back and ask him for, I think Board Member Noble and myself are ready to vote, and then we can go back to, and maybe Board Member Price is ready to vote, and then go back to Board Member Garcia so he can have a few minutes to think about it, since he's the newest one. But I think we're in the middle of a vote.
Might like to ask our attorney, was I correct when I said that ATC is under our jurisdiction or not?
They are under the jurisdiction of the district insofar as there are certain financial obligations that we have towards them, and they have certain obligations towards us. And there's some contractual obligations with respect to their facilities. In terms of their enrollment, I'd have to look into that, but because they're a charter school, they get certain waivers automatically.
I know the answer to that, Madam President, because I helped write the Charter
All
School
right.
Act
All
on
right.
2006,
All
and
right.
the policy for lotteries for charters are mandated by the state. They are not governed by the authorizer. They are in statute. And so in other words, they could never do a differentiated policy, and they have to follow the exceptions that are allowed in statute and regulation.
Thank you.
And so it's not even part of the charter. They don't really have an option to do that, and it's not under the authority of the authorizer.
Thank you, I stand corrected.
Wait. So,
Board Member Garcia?
so Madam Superintendent, so the state actually regulates the lottery already?
This,
For charters?
for
Which-
charters
this
and
is-
for districts.
This is a
That is
charter
something new. So all the charters and the districts, in terms of equal access and how the lotteries go, we have to follow their rules in terms of preferences. And they go down, like the first preference, like for public schools, has to be, if you've been in an F school for X amount of years.
yeah.
And then it goes down, I can't remember the order, but it goes down by different preferences for lotteries. And so they want to make sure that, the reason they did that, they didn't want districts to make up funny rules. In terms of charters aren't even allowed to do a segmented lottery. They're not. The only reason that and I have always questioned it, but it's a magnet school, so there is no real rule around it. But quite frankly, I think that you really have to follow the lottery rule for all your schools. I guess someone could challenge it, and we would need to look at that. But in terms of the SIB rule, it applies to charters as it does to our schools, and we can't mandate that they would change that. We have no statutory authority to do that, even though we are an authorizer.
Thank you. Board Member Carrillo?
I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, Dr. Garcia. So if that's the case, if we were to not allow SIBs as part of our process, we'd be like the only school in the state doing that, not just in Santa Fe.
It's always been a question that I've brought up. If you recall, I had mentioned a while back, I don't know if you can really have a segmented lottery because, but I thought, well, maybe magnet status, you could get away with it. It hasn't, sometimes you can do things if people don't challenge it. But quite frankly, if you look at what it says about schools around lotteries, it's very clear, and this would be different. You look at what the state says around lotteries.
So then I can take that as a yes. We'd probably likely be the only.
I don't know what other districts are doing.
All
I
right,
don't know what
good.
others are
That's just
around.
good.
I
Thanks.
couldn't say that.
Vice President Cashman?
Well, then I'm not happy that we're even having this discussion. If we're in violation of state
Then we
law,
shouldn't have made the
then we shouldn't have been amending the policy.
I don't
So-
know if we are around magnets. It's not real clear about magnet schools. I've questioned it, but I don't know. I
Well,
don't know the answer,
okay.
and I don't think they really address magnets
Then we're not
in the
ready to vote.
lottery, do they, in the statute?
Board President Price, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia, and Member Cashman, they do not address magnets in the open enrollment statute.
But if they then address the regular public, I'm not going to violate state law, no matter what my personal feelings are. I'm not going to violate. So
Well,
if
we
we, so.
undid that already.
So if we know that under state law, we are required to have siblings have preference,
That's not what she said.
she doesn't know about magnets. If we are required under the open enrollment policy for public schools under state laws that siblings have preference, then this is a moot point. We shouldn't have been changing that. So what I would like to know, and if we don't know what this state law says, then I think we need to table this. But I'm not going to cast a vote in violation of state law.
Is
It's
this
silent
via-
on magnet, right? I mean, it doesn't really say about magnets. Is that correct, Ms. Sullivan?
That's right. It is silent on magnets, Member Cashman. The law is pretty clear about public schools, and it's pretty clear about charter schools, but it's silent on magnets.
And under public schools, what does it say about sibling enrollment? Under public schools, not magnets or charters, but under public schools, if this is an option that the state is saying public schools must be able to follow, then if they're silent on magnet, then we have to follow what public schools say.
It has the four, Madam President, while she's looking it up, as I recall, it has the four preferences. And I can't remember, maybe Vanessa or somebody can help me. Do you remember what they are? I know the first one, or all of them has them, but I know the first one has to do with ESSA. It has to do if 2 years of a failing school. The second one is? Oh, yeah, returning student.
Number 2 is returning students. Number 3 is, I had them just a second.
Because I think staff
is
staff is fourth, and I
Staff
think
is
sibling
fourth.
is third.
Right, that's what it is, exactly right. Siblings third, returning students 2, and F school is 1.
It doesn't say something.
Okay, all right, thank you, Secretary Noble. She has the state law in front of us. This is mute. It says siblings. We need to go back and amend the second reading to proposal number 1. We can't violate state law.
Board Member Garcia?
Just really quick, I'm glad there's a lot of people out there, so you see some of the stuff that we deal with, and it's very difficult up here to determine what way we need to go. And I don't think any of our intentions up here, of any board members, are to displace any families. We all take care of our kids, and we want our kids to do the best in our Santa Fe public school systems, because they actually, this is our community, everybody's communities, and they're the future of us. So just please keep that in mind. We're not here to displace any kids. So once again, at a public school, if somebody lives in the Capitol High District, and their 10th grader brother goes to Carlos Gilbert because their mother drops him off there every single day, and whenever the sibling wants to go there, they have preference on the lottery in the public school?
Yeah, well, if they're long as there's space, and then, of course, they go into the lottery, and then they start pulling by grade and by preference, okay, according to what is allowed in statute. So the first people that bump everyone are those who are trying to move from a failing school. I think it's twice, 2 consecutive, it's 2 out of 4 years. It doesn't even have to be consecutive. So if it's an F school and 2 out of 4 years, they're the first ones.
I would just caution Board Member Garcia, I know you're trying to weigh all the issues. I withdraw all my objections to this policy, and I would hope that you would follow along with me, that you do not want to be violating state law and have a lawsuit of the school board. And based on what Board Member Noble has in front of her, if we go ahead and do not amend and go to Amendment 1 of the policy, we would be in violation of state law.
Board Member Carrillo?
I think you were seriously, basically, no action at all leaves things the same, right? SIBs are in. I want a yes or no answer. Yes or no. No action at all, leave SIBs in, we're following what's been done the last...
No, because you had a first reading and you vote...
But SIBs are not part of the language.
Yes,
Okay.
it was. It was part of the language.
Not on the paper, it's not even here. It says no preference.
Right,
Okay.
so then that takes the sibling, it
And I don't
takes all the
necessarily think it's
preferences
moot,
out.
because this is a different situation than interzone transfers.
No, this falls under open enrollment and preference for lotteries and how you get into schools. And so it does, the only thing that I wasn't clear about is magnet, because it's silent about magnet. But I think that you make a case. I mean, I have always questioned the segmented lottery because of that. And so I think that we were really moving in the right direction. And so I think you do have to take action, correct, Ms. Sullivan, because they did the first read, so they could amend it now the way we recommend, and we would be back where I think we're saying you ought to be.
Okay, so then I would continue on to say...
I would like her to make her statement.
Board President Price, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia, and Member Carrillo, you do have to vote on whether to approve the second reading and whether to pass one of the two amendments before you.
Or any amendment, or
Okay, so my
leave
motion
it
is
as
still
is.
on the
Or
floor,
none.
right? My motion is still on the floor, and I'd like us to take action. I understand Ms. Cashman's concern. I feel that we can completely take action. It's within our right to do so, and I'd like to put this puppy to rest.
So my understanding, because that was at least an hour ago, is that you want to,
We haven't been here that long. Hour and 5 minutes. All right. I want to accept staff's recommendation.
can I,
Yeah.
my understanding is that you want to, and that you moved, that we vote in favor of the second reading and also the first proposed amendment.
Correct.
All right. Vice President Cashman.
I would either like to read into record, courtesy of Secretary Noble, the state law, so we can make a decision, or that we table this and put it on the board agenda for Tuesday. But I would have a problem with any of us as a board member incurring liability for the district until we clearly go through and make sure we know what we're voting on. And if, you know, we may need a legal reading, but it's clearly telling what needs to be done. Now, there is a question Board Member Noble pointed out to me that said additional enrollment preferences may include. So that would not be in violation of state law, and under may include is siblings already attending the school. So that is a preference of the board, but I have not completely read this, so I would like to table this.
Madam President, on that point? The only reason I ask that you not table it and that you bring it back is that the lottery is in place. It's really that's why we brought it today. Normally, we don't do policies in study sessions. Usually a study session is just a study session, but it's because of the timing. We've got a lottery that's in place. Parents are making decisions, and I think it's not fair to them, you know. So this is why I would recommend that you not move this till next Tuesday, because parents are going to lose another week.
Board Member Carrillo?
So if it would please Ms. Cashman, because you saw the word may in that statute, we could have our council tonight to put this to rest. On Amendment 1, add a line that gives preference to siblings. I mean, that would alleviate, as I'm hearing it, that would alleviate Ms. Cashman's concern that somehow I don't believe that we're violating state law in any way, but if that would help to move this along, then that could be a way to do so.
Secretary Noble?
So part of the reason I was familiar with this is I did ask about it before, and I believe we actually got a reasonably consistent answer, which was that this portion speaks specifically to district schools and to charter schools and says that the preferences may include and includes a list there that is with siblings. My own understanding of it is we are more in line with state law and with what is, as Board Member Carrillo postulated, the practice throughout the state to have sibling preferences. But for the record, this was brought up before and answered in a reasonably consistent way that we were not out of compliance with state law, that we likely had the ability to do this.
And my understanding is that there's a difference between may and shall.
Yeah.
Vice President Cashman?
The English teacher.
Yeah, and we need to legally find out what that difference is. But as it goes through, and I thank you for having this policy. I had it in a different book, but I didn't bring it tonight. What it clearly talks about F schools, and so they have first preference. People within this, so I'll just try to be concise. people within a zone of the school have first preference. Second preference is schools that have an F for 2 of the prior 4 years. Third, students that previously attended public school, and fourth, all other applicants. Then it goes down to talking about additional enrollment preferences may include after-school childcare, childcare for siblings of students attending public school, children of employees employed at public schools, extreme hardship, location of the student's previous school, siblings of students already attending the public school, and student safety. So the board, from quickly rereading this, the board is allowed to have some preference, unless may and shall. Can you remind us what may and shall mean? Because it's not always the same thing legally. So could we
Please,
have
Ms. Sullivan.
Board Member Cashman, shall is a mandate and may is discretionary.
So I would withdraw my comment that we could be in violation of state law, because we wouldn't be. But we do have a vote on the table, and again, I would say Board Member Garcia is not ready to vote. He could just say pass, and then we come back to him.
Board Member Garcia, are you ready to vote?
Yes, just really quick.
Can I have a yes or a no
yes,
first?
I'm ready to vote. So
Thank
which
you.
is the actual, in order for us to be consistent with everything else we're doing, which is it, number 1 or number 2?
Amendment that Board Member Garcia, I'm sorry, Board Member Carrillo made.
All right,
Sorry, my mic was off. The amendment that Board Member Carrillo made.
thank you.
All right, let's have a vote. Let's do this by roll call. Board Member Carrillo.
Yes.
Board Member Garcia.
Can we start at that end?
No.
I know I can pass. Yes, I'm okay with amendment number 1, just because it's the consistency
You have to
that
do
we have.
reasons afterward, you just have to vote.
Well, I'm just going to vote. I don't.
Then you can do it. You
Was
can
that
say
a
all that
yes?
stuff after.
Board Member Noble.
Yes.
Board Member Cashman.
No.
President votes no. It passes.
And now you can do it if you want. It's a procedural thing. You're not going to watch the Olympics now.
Or stay here with us.
May I just, board members, I want to thank you all for consideration and a lively debate, and I appreciate being here with you.
Thank you for coming. All right, so we did D. Now we have the second reading and approval of Policy 302, Attendance by Non-Resident Students and Open Enrollment. And I want to thank the parents and families of Mandela School, and also thank you for leaving quietly. The City Council doesn't usually get that. Thank you.
For approval.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. I don't see anything redlined or any changes, so.
Is there any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It passes. The second reading and approval of Policy 303, Attendance Areas. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
And do I have a second?
A second.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. First, Vice President Cashman, and then Board Member Carrillo.
Just on the discussion of attendance zones, I remember one member of the public last year saying, I didn't realize how much of an impact the school board could have on my child. And this is a time for everyone that's out there watching, and I know I've had some calls from people watching. This is the time to be involved. We don't hear your voices until after we pass. I'm telling you, this is affecting you, attendance areas. We have had no comment from public, and so we are deciding tonight that you know what your attendance zone is, but then there are secondary attendance zones. So I'm just saying, it's good if you care about what's happening with your student to try to stay up with what's happening with the board. So we don't have to have a discussion like we just had a few minutes ago and revisit policy.
Board Member Carrillo?
I'd echo what Maureen said, and I would say it was Ben Franklin that said, the decisions are made by the people that show up. So relative to discussion on this, just so I'm clear, we're changing this particular policy because of adding the Pinon as a secondary zone to Amy Beal. Great, just wanted to make sure of that. Thank you.
Board Member Garcia?
So just on Board Member Cashman's statements, so can you explain to or can somebody explain to the general public what what these zones are and how it works in a nutshell?
Madam President, members of the board, this particular policy created a secondary zone for Amy Beal, which is,
I want you to back up. What is a zone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Attendance zones are your home school where you are to be registered to go. If you choose not to go there, you would put in an interzone transfer, or you might go to private school, or any number of things. Depending on how far you live from your home school, according to state law, you would be transported. In order to legally transport kids that might need to go to Pinon if they require transportation, or parents to know that there's a secondary zone, because we had to cap enrollment, and it's based on grade. So if a particular grade is capped, then you would have to go to Pinon. If you live far enough, according to, I think, more than a mile, or if there are geographic boundaries that might, make it difficult, maybe it's less than a mile, but you have to cross a ditch or you have to cross a busy highway, then we would transport you. But we have to establish that as a secondary zone to legally be able to claim transportation dollars, and for families to be aware that there is a secondary zone for this school. And this has been done before for other schools, my understanding, in the district.
Vice President Cashman?
Did that answer your question?
I would just remind the board, this does not only apply to Amy Beal. This policy needed to be updated so we could send the kids from Amy Beal, but this could apply to any school at such time. So that's why I was saying to the public, this affects every school in Santa Fe. It just happens that, you know, if your school is not overcrowded, you probably don't pay attention. But I can think of some other schools in my mind that probably are going to be affected. It doesn't tell you what the attendance zone is, the secondary zone. It just establishes a secondary zone. But it could apply to any school that has overcrowding.
On that point, Madam President, I would believe, Vice President Cashman, members of the board, that we would, there is public notice when we're doing this, that we would not just behind the scenes create secondary zones for other schools. So we would notify the public of the intent.
I've had a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes. The second reading and approval of policy 333, transportation. May I have a motion?
I will move for approval, and President Price, I am currently about an hour late for a mayoral forum, so after this vote, I am going to depart and will be reading the presentation and the other materials very carefully.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. Board Member Garcia.
Can somebody explain to me what a transportation zone is?
It is where you are eligible for transportation. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
And that can get touchy. Grandma can't, you know, they can't get picked up at mom's house and then dropped off at grandma's house. And that can get touchy. Okay. All in favor of the second reading of the approval of policy 333, transportation?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It passes. All right. Board update and follow-up. Vice President Cashman.
So we thought this meeting was going to be quick. I know that I've talked with the superintendent about this, but I would like the board to be updated once we find out how our letters to Amy Beal went on verification. Would you please provide a board update on those numbers, and then keep us informed about how many children are on the waiting list right now, because I know there are children on the waiting list right now that are not going to Amy Beal, even though it's their zone.
Okay, and Board, Dr. Garcia, my understanding is that there was, I got news that certain people received a robocall about a date that is incorrect on the calendar.
Madam President, members of the board, on the art calendar, it shows that schools are closed March 1st.
I just wanted to get
And it was not clear, we just missed it, that it got on the art calendar. It is March 6th that schools are closed. We've asked principals to include it in their newsletters. It will soon be on the marquee. We've sent out robocalls. We'll do another one in a week. But families need to plan for childcare, so we were doing our best to get the information as quickly as we could, but yet not confuse people about the election on SB 9. So that is what we're doing. It's correct everywhere else. It was just that, and I don't know how many people keep the art calendar up at home, but nonetheless, people will see that it shows schools are closed. The district offices will be open, and it's the same day that we have our board meeting, March 6th. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I just wanted to get it out there again. All right, the superintendent.
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
Dr. Garcia, can you actually give me a copy of the proposed map for the, I think roughly, what do we have, the Bradbot, was it fiber? We had a presentation about 2 meetings ago regarding the fiber, where the fiber was going to go, that grant that we got from the federal government.
I think Tom Ryan said he would get it to him.
Right, thank you.
All right, we move on to the superintendent update and follow-up.
I have no update or follow-up.
We move on to presentation, discussion, and possible action, strategic focus for math instruction.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia. I'm excited to actually bring this to you tonight. I have some people here with me that I think you'll enjoy hearing from, since it's not just me telling you from the district perspective, but actually we have a teacher here tonight, Jason Ware from Capitol High School. He is the department chair of math department. I also have Vanessa Romero, who is the executive director of schools. They'll be talking on a little bit on park tools, but she'll also be talking with her old hat of being a principal using park tools in her school. And then Sherry Kaufman will be here to answer questions if you have them, and possibly give a couple specific examples. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started. This first slide is really just a quote from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. They really are pushing us to looking at this as a principle of action to action, that all schools look a certain way, all math classes look a certain way. When you walk in, these are the kinds of things that we should be seeing, and I'll just read a couple sentences of it to give you a flavor. That we need to take action to create classrooms and learning environment where students are actively engaged with worthwhile tasks that promote mathematical understanding, problem solving, and reasoning. At the very bottom it says we need to take action to create classrooms where all students become mathematical problem solvers, making sense of problems and discussing their solutions. And that in a nutshell is really the Common Core shifts of the way we teach math today. It's not as easy to teach, and so that then brings us into play that we have a lot of work to do and a lot of professional development and coaching and training. You know that our proficiencies for this year were very close to last year. I guess about 2/10 difference. So we have work to do to build that proficiency. Our outcomes for the math, and we're still working on the whole district strategic plan, but the plan that I've been working on this year, so I'm just looking at this year as first year for being the deputy superintendent, that we're looking at all 8th graders being proficient or higher in math based on the measures of progress and PARC, that all students are proficient or higher in Algebra 1, and teachers have made the shift in math teaching and learning. And when I talk about the shift, again, that's going into the new standards. Not really new anymore, but they're different than they were for 100 years. That classrooms are student-centered, where students are engaged with rigorous problem solving, etc. Students learning rich and academic discourse through growth mindset and gradual release of responsibility. What that means is that the teacher gives up the responsibility of doing all the talking, and the students start doing the talking, and you'll see that in just a minute. And a standards-based learning environment. What that means is that we're putting first and foremost the standards that we use. These are the Common Core national and standards. They are, whether other states, and many of us have looked at other states' standards, they're very, very, very similar to the Common Core, even if they call them something different. The bottom line is that we had to make it more about critical thinking than memorizing algorithms, so that people could understand and really relate to what it means instead of just memorizing an algorithm. So our initiatives this year, and we'll again move back into the strategic plan and make some of these initiatives a little bit different for next year, but also based on the data that we get at the end of the year, that it has been really important to our team that we provide a state-of-the-art professional development and coaching that supports the 8 standards of mathematical practice. I'll show you those. If you haven't seen them, I'll show them to you in just a minute, but really they're the overarching goals or the overarching standards of all the math standards. That if everyone knows what we're trying to get to, that we can do this as a community, if you will. Build K through 12 curriculum maps. I've talked to you about that before. I really believe that curriculum maps help teachers build better lesson plans, and lesson plans that are more rigorous. I've been in classrooms. I don't believe in many of the classrooms the rigor is where we need it to be to do well in college, do well in tests, etc. And I'll be talking about that rigor a little bit. Provide access to quality instructional materials, including online and digital components. We've, I think, done a great job this year in getting many of the instructional materials in front of our teachers and kids that they needed. We've also developed a math advisory committee. Dr. Garcia was, this was one of her things that she really wanted to hear from the math teachers throughout our district, and not just once a year, but we're meeting with them at least 4 times a year to get their opinion of where we are on all of these issues.
Just to clarify, though, it wasn't just math teachers. We brought in people from Lanel, we brought in people from the universities, community members, mathematicians, retired mathematicians, to also give us guidance about how we could improve math instruction, and this is ongoing still.
Thank you for clarifying and reminding me, as I did build that into my next point, that we have included in that math advisory and do have partnerships with the Lanel's Math and Science Academy and the Math Teacher Leader Network. I think that I may have actually forgotten to introduce Sherry Kaufman, but Sherry actually meets with the Math Teacher Leader Network and the Math and Science Academy, so she's our representative. The Santa Fe Alliance for Science, because of the STEM, we go back and forth working with our science folks. Interfaith, Math Amigos, and we do have one of our leaders in Interfaith and Math Amigos, Lynn Bickley, here tonight, so I'm very excited that she's here to answer any questions as well. Our New Mexico Computer Science, Santa Fe Community College, and the Foundation. Just a reminder, if you haven't seen this before, the math standards, and again, this is all of the standards here, but they're broken down into 3 parts: the content, the mathematical practices, and the instructional shifts. The practices, simply stated, are, and I'm not going to read those to you, but you can see what teachers use, if you will. It's like a blueprint, and what they use to build lessons and to look at standards that and how to teach things. So we use those standards as kind of our overall umbrella on how we will teach mathematics. And I think you'll have a much better idea of that when Jason gives you a lesson, a math lesson, and we'll see how well you do. The Common Core shifts that I've been talking about, that's the shift in instruction. How do we instruct now compared to how we instruct even in 10 years ago, even 20 and 30 years ago? There's less standards now to focus on so that we can really go deep instead of wide. Believe it or not, there used to be twice as many standards in math. Now we go deep instead of wide. We look at conceptual understanding more than anything. We look at coherence or thinking about cross grades. Teachers are involved in that all the time in their PLCs. And the rigor that I talk about is, again, conceptual understanding, procedural skill, and fluency application. But problem-solving conceptual understanding is not easy to do, and it's not easy to teach. That's where we need a lot of professional development. It is hard to really build lessons that get to that depth of knowledge and to that critical thinking part. I'm going to show you a really, really quick video that will give you an idea. What Jason's going to do is talk about a high school math class. I'm going to show you a quick video on an elementary one. If I start seeing you fall asleep, I'll stop it really fast, but I think it will excite you.
Board Member Garcia, turn on your mic, please.
What slide is this?
Slide 6.
Okay. Really, can you explain to me, you said really quick that it's very difficult to teach this type of...
Talking to your mic, please.
This type of learning, so what is needed for it?
Okay, so and I'll show you, when I show you the video, it'll probably speak for itself, but instead of just having teachers, for instance, have the kids practice on the multiplication tables, that they'll use more math manipulatives and drawing out what something looks like times something else and what it looks like, using blocks, using something to really start understanding what you're really doing instead of just memorizing things and memorizing algorithms of any type, even into algebra. I think a lot of us memorize how you even do the algebraic equations, but we don't really know why we're doing it. And so we're trying to teach students a little bit more relevancy to the outside world of using math and also to understand what you're doing.
So is it a different curriculum for each different type of grade? 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, or how does it work?
The curriculum is based on the standards, and so yes, the first few standards they're all in order. So you have your first standards on learning numeracy, for instance, all the way up into algebraic expression, all the way up into 7th grade, and then Algebra 2. So yeah, your standards move along and get more and more difficult, yes.
So you said that it's actually difficult teaching this method way, and is that because we are understaffed for it, or we could use some more staff?
No, it's more that there's not a lot of practice in college to do this, so that when they get here, we provide the professional development to do it. It's just, if you'll see this video, I think you'll get the complexity of teaching. Teaching is an art, and it's hard to have all these different pieces, and we call it differentiated instruction, meaning you don't stand at the front of the room with the rows of desks, stand at the front of the room and lecture the whole day. So what's the opposite of that? The opposite of that is you do different things during the day. And this will give you an idea of that in just a second.
I just really one last thing. I think this is actually great. It's almost like adventure therapy that they're doing now across the nation, which is instead of sitting there across with the counselor, back and forth, you're doing different things to actually trust whoever you need counseling with. So this is good.
Thank you, sir.
Board Member Carrillo, I'm sure you're going to like this. They're going to talk about it. I said, I'm sure you're going to like this. They're going to talk about it. Math.
You guys ready for your math? My name is Carey. I'm a 5th grade dual language teacher at Banting Elementary in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I teach.
Just really quick while
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
getting
yeah.
this going, just got information that I guess is Dr. Garcia knows. I guess the Senate had a proposed $6.3 million budget. They actually sent it over to the House, and the House didn't agree with it.
I didn't think they would. I didn't think they would.
Kindergarten and goes all the way through 12th grade.
I saw
The
that
goal
just
of our
before I
program
came
is for our
over.
students to become biliterate and bicultural. We have students who are strong in English, students who are strong in Spanish, and they build upon their strengths and get strong
The
together.
door locks.
So today, we're going to start with one of our number talks. Today's math lesson was in English, and we started with a number talk. Students were expected to come up with strategies for solving problems. And then that led into our activity that had to do with multiplying and dividing fractions. The language learning target was the students needed to be able to share their thinking, to verbalize it, and to follow directions in order to solve problems. So, and thinking it, but then they say it out loud and they get a chance to verbalize what it is that they're thinking. Are you guys ready for your math? My name is Carey. I'm a 5th grade dual language teacher at Banting Elementary in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I team teach with Jessica Hay. We really want to see how much can we do mentally. Our two-way dual language program at Waukesha starts at 4-year-old kindergarten and goes all the way through 12th grade. The goal of our program is for our students to become biliterate and bicultural. We have students who are strong in English, students who are strong in Spanish, and they build upon their strengths and get strong together. So today, we're going to start with one of our number talks. Today's math lesson was in English, and we started with a number talk. Students were expected to come up with strategies for solving problems. And then that led into our activity that had to do with multiplying and dividing fractions. The language learning target was the students needed to be able to share their thinking, to verbalize it, and to follow directions in order to solve problems. So in order to be able to do that mental math, we have to start looking for some what? Idalia?
Efficient ways to do it.
Efficient ways to do it. Esme? Patterns. We really want to see those patterns to get the students prepared so that they were able to tackle the challenging problem. We had to set the foundation for what does it mean to multiply and divide fractions? What does that look like? What section of your math log are these going to go in? Hector? Strategies. If you can't think of a strategy right away, is that okay? Yeah. So what are you going to have to write in there? You're just going to leave it blank? What are you going to write in there if you can't think of any strategies? Pelham?
You might say, I want to ask a question about it.
You might ask a question about it. Do you think when we come together and talk about it, your classmates might come up with some strategies that might help you? Yeah, so then you might start writing some things down. So those of you that are going over with Mrs. Haig, I'm going to ask you to come and get one of these and go right on over there, and our group is going to come on over here. This is what you should have on your sheet. Tell me if I made a mistake. Do I ever make mistakes? A number talk is great for all learners, but especially for ELLs. Not only are they writing it and thinking it, but then they say it out loud and they get a chance to verbalize what it is that they're thinking and share with other people. Okay, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. So it's really, really quick, as fast as you can. What strategies do you notice as you're doing them? Go through, write them down, write them down. Think of what you're going to share.
Can we use the multiplication charts?
That's a tool, isn't it? Okay, so you cut this into 2 parts, right? You cut this into 4 parts. What do you think you're going to do to get this answer?
Cut it in 8 parts. So I have to divide.
And try it and see what happens.
Multiply 44 times 8.
See what you got. Okay, see what you got. Michelle, what did you get for this? 1/2 of 44? 22. I'm going to write this down. Okay, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Okay, how did you guys know that? You knew it so quickly. How did you know that so quickly? Kiara?
I knew that it was 22 because I saw 44 and I saw the denominator, which was 2, so it made me think that I need to cut it in half.
Now this one, what's the difference between this problem and this problem? What changed? Know what I mean?
In the denominator, it's a fourth instead of a half.
So we know that we have to find a fourth instead of a half. We know that our denominators change, great vocabulary. Is there somebody from Mrs. Hagg's group that wants to share a strategy that they used when they were doing this? James?
I used the standard algorithm to solve the last problem and the second one.
Okay, and I think that's what Tyler was telling us. So you multiplied across and then divided by 12? Okay.
12 times 2, and that would be 24. Oh, 11 minus, then you get 27.
So I'm going to read you a story. It has to do with our race people. We're going to find out what they're doing. Are you ready? We moved on from the number talk and went into a problem-solving lesson where they had to determine the rate that people were running based on the time that it took them to run and the amount of laps that they ran. Okay, you're going to take 1 minute to look at it with yourselves, then I'm going to have you touch your partner about what it is that you see and what it is that you notice, and what do you think that information is giving you. Okay, turn and talk.
I noticed that it shows the, like, how many, I think, like, how many times they went around, because it says circuits of track completed. And then it has, like, fractions, and it has, like, the number of miles that they each ran.
Throughout the lesson, the students use their iPads in order to personalize their instruction. They're able to draw or write or complete their assignments, and then they can show their work to the class. All right. Who wants to share? What did you notice when you were looking at this? Kiara?
When you look at the minutes, Bob and Alien, I think, they don't have the minutes, so you might need to, like, be dividing and multiplying.
So Kiara's already looking at some strategies. She's thinking she might have to divide. On your iPad, you're going to start taking some notes, and you're going to try solving this. I'm only going to give you 5 minutes to work with your bilingual.
Right? I mean, and this is for a lot of parents that are having difficulty
helping them.
With very basic whole number operations even. I'm not even talking fractions. It's so different in how they approach the work than the way we were taught.
This video, to me, showed just about every math practice. It showed many of the different strategies, including working with English language learners that you notice, the math standards, but also English language standards happening at the same time. So you can imagine how hard work it is for our teachers to do something like that. What I wanted now is for Vanessa to talk a little bit about the tools of assessment that we use, and these tools have come from PARC, but we're getting more and more tools that we're able to use, but I think the one that I wanted her to show you and how we use them and how teachers use them in math. If you could do that, Vanessa, thank you.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you, President Price, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia. I want to take an opportunity to share with you some of the thoughtful ways that our principals and our teachers have been utilizing PARC tools and looking at standards to inform their instruction. School sites have been breaking down the data, looking at the standards, looking at individual students, and then developing plans of actions to support their students. And so I'm going to walk you through this cycle of informed instruction, looking at this big view of standards at a grade level, the standards that we need to focus on are those standards that we've done well in, to looking at individual students and the percentage points that they earned on the PARC. So I'm going to go ahead and pass out a folder.
Yeah. The peanuts, the salty and sweet. Thank you.
So in this folder, there are two different packets. The first packet includes data from Romita Thomas Elementary from last year. And this was provided to us from the PED, and it's called an evidence statement table. And this is specific for 5th grade. And so what it is at the very bottom, it has all the questions that the students were tested on, but then it also identifies the standards at the very bottom of those questions. It'll list what the standard is, and I'll go into more specifics. If you look at the key...
Can I ask you to pull your mic a little closer?
Oh, if you look at the key on the right-hand side, you'll see that the upside-down orange triangle represents the school. The green circle is a district, and the blue square is the state. And then the cross-state, meaning those schools, or I'm sorry, those states that are participating in taking the park. So what I did was, at Romita Thomas, at the beginning of last year, we were provided these reports, and I circled and identified the standards that were well below the comparison to the district, and from there kind of identified a pattern of standards that we maybe needed to focus on as a school. And I wrote those standards at the very top right. So 2 standards that we needed to focus on at the school in 5th grade were numbers and operations in fractions, and numbers and operations using base 10. So I'll give you a minute to look at that.
Really quick, the cross-state would be...
Those are states that utilize the park assessment.
So how many states are now using park assessment?
It's not very many.
It's not
I want to
that many,
say
right?
Probably
So-
under 6,
I was going to
maybe
say like
6
a
or 7.
handful, right?
And so this is all of those states, what
Right.
their average is?
Exactly. And so this, oh, go ahead.
And it's a very, very rigorous exam because it's, I'm sorry, college and career readiness. And I would venture that most of us at this table would have trouble even with the 8th grade test, quite frankly.
So the process that I took last year at Romita Thomas was sitting with the leadership team. I identified these 2 standards that, you know, there's lots of standards that we need to address, right, as a 5th grade or a 3rd grade or 4th grade. But let's look at just a couple of standards at a time and then identify some ways that we're going to look at individual students, create strategy groups, and I'll explain more. So the second page, if you flip the page, it lists 45, I think it's 60 questions on the left-hand side, the standards that it addresses, and the domain. So that's how I figured out that we needed to focus on fractions and base 10 and numbers and operations.
Thank you, Board President. So on the left, the difficulty order, that's the question? Or
So going back to the first page of the evidence statement table, it lists a number of problems and questions, and so the first one is the most difficult on the test, and it ranges to the least difficult.
So like that 5C2-3, that's a question, we don't know the question, that's just,
That's a standard.
okay. Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So the good question is that Carey said that we actually, so we didn't do too well.
Speak into the mic, please.
Read that?
I'm sorry?
So for instance, on that number 1 there, or line number 1.
Right.
We didn't
So-
do too well, right?
But it was a
Well,
very difficult question, and so as a school and as a district, we fell below the state average.
Oh, I see, okay, okay.
What I did pass out is our results from last year. I'm sorry, but I did
Pass out were the results from last year, and we presented these to you at the beginning of the year. Some of those schools that did really well, and even Ramirez Thomas.
I'm proud to
With
say.
what was your gain, 2.3%?
Right, in math. And
Is-
I want to say, I'm sorry, excuse me, just being a South Side school, we, I think, ranked 7th behind schools on this side of town. So we were proud of the fact that we've been doing a lot of work in math
And even the 2.3% growth is higher than the state average, which was a very slight gain in mathematics statewide. We exceeded the state average in reading. We were right at the state average at math. Our goal is to continue to exceed the state average and accelerate our growth. And I know that as they look at professional development, they're looking at what strategies some of our schools utilized. Now, if you look at particularly schools like Gonzales and Pinon and Nava and Chaparral, Sweeney, that had some pretty amazing gains. I think Atalaya also, Atalaya had like a 12.2% increase in mathematics over last year. Now, can you sustain 12.2% growth every year? I don't think so. But we want to continue to see them making a positive trajectory and as a district exceeding the state average.
So, Board Member Garcia?
So really quick, Superintendent, just to read a Sweeney Elementary, number of students, obviously, number of students that were tested, the green area.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
So the way to read this is Sweeney Elementary School, best 239 kids tested, number of students, 221, so they went up 13%? Is that how you read that?
And the students who met or exceeded expectations was 13%. Percentage of students who met or exceeded, you have to go by years, so just read each column. It tells you, the descriptor is above the column. Like on the right is a percent point change in percentage of students who met or exceeded expectations.
So 2% of the kids out of 239 kids?
No, that's a change in maths. That's a change in the number of students who met or exceeded. It's not 2% were proficient. It's the percent of, if you want to look at the percent of students that met or exceeded expectation or proficiency, but the state uses the term meeting or exceeding expectations, you're going to look at the first column in green. The column on the right is the percent of change. Does that make sense? So let's look at Sweeney, 13% met or exceeded expectations, compared to, say, Acequia, where 47.7% met or exceeded expectations. Is that clear?
Yes.
So it's a percent of kids that are meeting or exceeding expectation.
Board Member Carrillo?
So on the flip side of that, we look at Ward Gormley, the question would be, what the heck happened, right, in this 1 year where we had 73% meeting or exceeding and it dropped to 61.7. So places that we have measurable decreases, I would imagine then we're going to have staff say, "Híjole, what the heck happened?"
And we look at the data, and also you also have to look at the grade, because not every, here's the problem. We also look at growth, right? Where were my fourth graders last year compared to now in fifth grade? What kind of growth did they make? What kind of growth did the sixth graders make? But when you're looking here, you're not comparing the same cohort of kids. So you might have had more special ed students one grade. You might have had a lower end size. We always used to joke and say the kids were outside and they were spraying Chemlon, and it had an impact. I mean, you know, there's just so many different factors, but we want to see continual improvement. So if we, you know, you have the data, they can break it down by ethnicity, by how many kids were transferred kids. I mean, there may be a whole lot of reasons. Maybe the teacher was on maternity leave and they had a sub for a period of time. There are just a whole bunch of factors, and every school is different.
So then on the PED sheet, right? So we're just taking Rudy's example, the very first question, which was the hardest. And then if we look at the next page, that question obviously probably had to do with fractions. So in using this information together, you looked at every question, what were the mathematical components, if you will, and from that determined, okay, this is where, like, holy smokes, this is where we're really weak. And that was based on those determinations that you came up with fractions in base 10 operations.
Correct.
Were going to be the priority. Okay, got it. Thanks.
And then the other factor that we have as you move up in grades, like middle school and high school, are the levels of proficiency or I'm going to use proficiency for lack of a better term because we're all more used to that, but the kids who meet expectations or are nearing expectations. So you're now in 8th grade, but your math skills are 5th grade or 6th grade. You moved into the district or, you know, for whatever reason, maybe you started off behind as a kindergartner. And you developmentally were 3 years behind, which many of our kids are developmentally when they come in. And they're making progress, and they're inching along, but it's not accelerated. They're not catching up with their peers. So now we get to high school, and they have to meet the standards for Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 or geometry or whatnot. And now it becomes more difficult for these kids to master this very difficult content when they're further behind. And we look at this, you know, very low proficiency at high school, and it's a statewide problem. It's not an excuse. It's something that we're addressing, and they're working very aggressively on, and you know, you might talk about that in a little bit. But as we move up the continuum, it gets more and more difficult.
Yes.
And I just want to make a couple points in regards to this data. Again, as Superintendent Garcia was just talking about, getting to that high school level. Because as high school teachers, I'll speak on behalf of myself, but knowing what other high school teachers think, this data is very difficult for us to use effectively for a variety of different reasons. One of those reasons is our freshmen that we have coming into Algebra 1 rooms, we're not given direct access to their data from 8th grade. And so right away, that freshman class we have, we don't really know the data on that class. We only have the data on kids after they've gone freshman year down. So maybe at district level, we need to look at that. But another caveat to that is at high school, our content makes major shifts. And so our Algebra 1 kids, they take, in their freshman year, they take their PARCC exam in April. Well, we as teachers don't even get that data until September, October. Now those kids are already in geometry. So we're not really working with apples to apples comparison there, because the standards in terms of the content standards, not the standards of mathematical practice, there's very big discrepancies between algebra standards and geometry standards. So our geometry teachers might look at data from what these kids did in algebra, but they're teaching them geometry now. So this data is tough for us to use effectively for some of those different parameters and some of those different reasons at the high school level, is that there's continuous shift from year to year in the students we're getting and what classes they're going into, and there's delay in this data as it's coming to us. So I just want to make some of that kind of apparent.
And I'm hoping that the MAPS data is helping you to some degree?
In my honest opinion, no. That's because of the MAPS test that we're giving this year. It was made, I don't know who, a district decision, I'll put it at that, that the MAPS test that we're giving across all schools at all levels at the secondary level, we're giving this test called the Growth 6+ test within math. What this test basically does, it starts kids off, right at the beginning, they start at 6th grade level math questions, 6th grade standards. And it's a progressive test to where if kids get things right, they move on to higher level, more difficult content and higher level standards. If they get things wrong, they stay within that window, and it tries to pinpoint what it is they're struggling with. Well, if you're at a high school level and you've given it to juniors, but some of these juniors can't get past the 7th grade level questions, it's not telling us very much.
And that's what, well, it's telling you that,
Well,
that their skills are really low.
But in terms of our direct content, it's not telling us very much.
This is what I was trying, I think you just exemplified what I was saying, is that it's very difficult at the high school level if you're teaching Algebra 1 or Geometry, Algebra 2, Trig. I wouldn't be in those higher levels, but let's say Algebra 1. And those students are at 6th or 7th grade math skills, right? That they are going, I mean, the teachers have a real challenge of then trying to, you know, and that's where our math amigos come in handy, and the tutors, of trying to get these kids up to speed. And, you know, not all the kids go to summer school. We don't have K3+ at the secondary level. I mean, there's a lot of challenges of getting those kids up to speed, and also how teachers are not necessarily trained at the secondary level on differentiation of instruction, which is something that I think we need to move more towards, where the teacher is more of a coach. We've talked about the flipped classroom, where they're actually learning content at home, say digitally, and then being coached so the teacher can move around with maybe an aide in the classroom to be able to meet the different standards of kids. Because most of our secondary teachers are trained to teach the content to a group of kids, right? And we learned this algebraic concept, and that scaffolds to the next, I taught math, the next algebraic concept, right, and so on. And it does become difficult, I think, because were you trained how to differentiate instruction?
I'll say partly yes, but that's also because I'm new enough to the profession that I have that newer level of training.
Right, but a lot of people have not been, and so we're having to retool, retrain, a lot of challenges.
Vice President Cashman?
Though I'm concerned why our high school, and at least it may have changed since I left teaching, but when we, at the elementary level, we sent those scores and everything to the middle school. Why isn't the middle school sending those records to our high school teachers to use? I mean, the records are there, the information is there, and, I don't know, why we're
This is the first time I hear this. I wasn't aware of that.
I do want to say that this past school year, Ortiz made a really good effort to come to the feeder schools, the elementary schools, and we worked with them in providing just a really quick assessment in mathematics and gave those results to the principal and Ortiz so that they could work on placing students there in middle school. And I don't know if you can speak to that, right?
Similar concept from Ortiz coming up, all the feeder schools coming up, we're giving them last year and this year some placement type exams to get an idea of.
And I think it's something that we need to talk to our data team, that it should be automatic. I think now that we have peer feeders, which we did not have peer feeders for a long time, I think it's going to make the articulation much better in terms of content and planning.
Remember I said this stuff that used to be in the CUME folders? Okay. I'm sorry, it's Board Member Carey first.
So even without peer feeders, you should be able to track a kid going from 8th grade to 9th grade. So you should, on day one, know how this person has done in 8th grade, so you know that. So I guess this follows up on what Maureen said, and then I have another question. Why? What are we going to do to make sure that that happens so that freshman math teachers have a record on every kid that's sitting in front of them on the first day of school?
Madam President, members of the board, Board Member Carrillo, I'm definitely working on that right now. In fact, the advisory also talked about that. So we are working on it. It will happen. I thought that it was happening. I just assumed, but we're going to make sure it happens this coming year.
Great. And then are these tests that are being given, is it where you're, the one you talked about where it's graduated, where the kids are starting off with 6th grade level questions and then moving up as they, I assume those are on computers then, because that stops them if they can't.
Yes, they are. So it's a computer program, and it's not new to our district. From my understanding, before my time, 6-7 years ago, we were using the MAPS program. Then it went away. We were using what's called DEA for a couple of years, but this is our cycle assessment. But the other issue with MAPS is it tests very different type questions than PARCC does. MAPS is the more traditional multiple choice, A through D, choose your selection, as opposed to...
Whereas PARCC is all these drawings and stuff like that.
PARCC is a lot more of emphasizing some of the standards of mathematical practice.
But they do have access to the PARCC tools.
Absolutely.
And we've been doing more training on PARCC tools so that they do have that.
So they can show their work and stuff like that.
And have practice in what is being tested on PARCC.
Okay. And then, which I guess segues into English language proficiency. So if children are having difficulty with English, then they're having difficulty even reading and understanding the problem. Because I'm looking at Leslie here with her liter of milk, and it's like, holy smokes. And I mean, I could see how this would be extremely difficult for someone who didn't have mastery in English, and which then circles back to the thing that I brought up in the retreat, and I'm going to be looking forward to seeing our strategy on first grade literacy, reading and writing in English. Because that's something that we all agreed on in our retreat. Not third grade, but first grade. So that by the time they're in second and third, they're not learning to read anymore, they're reading to learn. because then these questions, it would seem, would come much more naturally, and it would follow, as I look at a lot of these numbers, that if they're having difficulty with English, they're going to have difficulty with all of this math.
Right.
Vice President Cashman?
I guess, Ms. Sink, you said that you were going to make sure that you're working on that those records move from our elementary schools to our middle schools to our high schools. What are we doing at our elementary level? Those teachers should be getting that, you know, so from first grade to second grade, the second grade teacher, and I just look, and I'll have some comments about math at the end, but a lot of the things that I attended a math workshop with Math Amigos a couple of weekends ago. If our kids don't know the basic facts, it's pretty hard, it's impossible at a high school level to be sitting there, or even at a middle school level. So I know we've changed and we moved from a much more critical thinking in math, but we can't ignore that those basic facts. I mean, my husband tutors at the community college. He sees the type of students we're sending from public schools, and again, if I say, what's your name? You don't sit there and think 20 minutes, what's your name? If I say, what's 5 times 5? You've got to, because they can't, it's impossible at the high school level for them to keep up. So I think sometimes we say, okay, we've got a new model and everything, and we've gone through, all of us, you know, basic math, but this is basic arithmetic. I don't consider those basic facts as math, they're arithmetic, and somehow I just spent a weekend helping a parent or grandparents that adopted, and they held their child back because they said they're not going to catch up. They're going to just go further and further behind, even though the school said just move them along. Somehow we've got to get serious, and I'll talk about a few things that across the board, 4th through 6th grade teachers. So at the first grade level, we've got to be doing something, but we've got to be passing that data on to the next teacher and say, in fact, one of the teachers said, I don't have time to look at all this data. We've got to make the time to look at it because we're just leaving our kids, and I'm just on a soapbox.
And I do believe, Madam President, if I may, that we don't necessarily even have to rely on the teacher passing it on. I know that we have the capability of doing that district-wide, and it may be some teachers know how to access it and some don't. And so we do need to follow up with Mr. Martinez, who's here, and Dr. Ryan, to make sure that that data is accessible, because I know that we can go pretty granular with the data, and so it may be that, you know, either it was not communicated, you know, I don't know, but we are going to get to the bottom of it. It doesn't have to be, with all the automation and all the data that we have on PowerSchool, there is no reason that you couldn't access that data quickly. So we'll follow up on that.
Board Member Carrillo?
So a couple of things, and following up on what Maureen said, this only requires a quick answer. Are we still doing kind of rote flashcard kind of learning at the elementary levels? So when you say, what's 8 times 6, they just say 48.
So I think part of it, I mean, yes, there's shifts in utilizing the Common Core standards, and it's both procedural and conceptual. And so we don't lose, like, the fact that we need to focus on just basic
So flashcard stuff is still, is still going on, because it is, you don't want to, like I'm looking at Leslie here with her liter of milk, dividing 12 into 70. We don't want to have we don't want to sweat over that. We wanted to say, let's see, 12 times 6 is 72, so it's not 6, it's 5. So it's 5, what's the remainder? She can look at the numbers and boom, boom, even though she's also conceptually understanding how much milk she had at all these meals and what is left for dessert.
And I don't want to take up a whole lot of time looking at this assessment that was created based on Park released items, right? So Park will release test items that were given. The teachers look at those release items, and then they'll design a very quick, simple assessment so that they can then place their children. And so the teachers, yes, look at procedural practice, like can they just do some basic math, and then can they do a multi-step
But
word
they have to
problem?
be able to explain how they get to it. So
Right.
for example, if a kid can do, a whole number of operations, it's more complex than just multiplying. And they can do it in their head, they can look at it, right? They
Mhm.
still have to be able to show
Yes.
how they
Understand
arrived
why.
at that, and it gets a little more.
No, I understand that. Just what might just be helpful down the line, because we still have Parent Academy, right? I would, and there's that little store on Cerritos Road where you can buy all those flashcards. I mean, I bought a bunch, and I did them with my son, when he was in 1st and 2nd grade. It's not there anymore? Oh.
Right.
Oh, well, I don't have
But you can get 'em.
I don't have an elementary school child. But I mean, that would be something good in Parent Academy to say, hey, look, this is how you support your kid in math with these very, very basic things. Anyway, that was just something. Then the last thing is, you mentioned rigor, that we want to, and it was from the movie, the video. What are we doing to hold teachers more accountable in terms of having that kind of rigor in their classroom? And then also, so anyone watching is not saying Steve hates teachers, it's like my feeling is if we're going to hold you to the standard, we always have to provide for you the tools, the professional development to get there. So what are we doing to get there?
President Price, did you want to? President Price, members of the board, Board Member Carrillo, we're doing a number of things. One is that we use the latest researched, evidence-based strategies that work. We use higher level questioning now. We are doing all kinds of professional development and workshops in literally writing higher level questioning. A lot of people think you can walk into a classroom and automatically ask a high level question. We're teaching them what is the difference between a low level question and a high level question, or even an activity. We're doing walkthroughs to make sure that we see those kinds of activities. So today we went, and I'm not going to tell you what school I went to, so
I'm not going to ask.
It's not going to happen.
All right.
We did a walkthrough at a school today.
Was it? No, I'm just kidding with you.
And in 2 classes in math, they were saying identify, identify, identify. Identify is a low-level activity. All they're doing is they're showing something on how to do it. They're not really thinking about it. So yeah, you can do that, but don't do it the whole period. You want to keep scaffolding up with what we call into more difficult activities and higher level. And I just wanted to show you so you're not worried. What rigor is conceptual understanding, but look at the second one. Procedural skill and fluency. Fluency in reading in elementary is the same thing. You practice your vowel sounds, you practice reading
Sight words.
Whatever. It's the same thing in math. You're doing fluency of adding, multiplying, subtracting, etc. So that's important in math as well. I just want you to know that's part of the shifts in mathematics. That part didn't change. They know
The
that's
language has
important.
changed, it's funny, but the activity.
Right.
That
Yeah.
part is the same,
Okay.
exactly.
Thank you.
And yes, Shari?
So I just wanted to say that first we want to build a conceptual understanding and show them.
Before you start, that Board Member Garcia, you had a question?
No,
Sorry.
we're kind of a little all over the place, but are we almost done with our presentation, we can ask questions, or no, I don't know.
I'll move forward. The rest of the packet, my packet just includes the process
Then I
that
get to finish?
a 5th grade team used.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate it, board members and President Price and Dr. Garcia. First, we want to build a conceptual understanding and show them the models of why 3 times 4 is 12, And so they have to understand why before they can, really conceptually understand. And then, yes, they're going to be practicing that fluency, and it should be done about 10 minutes a day in every grade level. So I just wanted to state that. With that.
Thank you. Did you have another question?
Just on the presentation, it's not up there, but on your packet, could I ask in the next time, we might be in violation of FERPA, so we don't identify
Right,
kids' names.
students.
Those all needed to be, They all needed to be.
There's one page, yes.
Yeah, so we need to not have that.
It's the very last page.
So I would ask the board members, please
To
don't.
give the packets?
Yeah, or do not share what's in there because.
Return the packets.
Yeah.
Return the packets at the end of the presentation, please.
That's okay, that's fine. The names aren't a big deal to me, but that's fine.
Can we go
redact
ahead?
them, and then they can give them back to you if you'd like.
President Price, may we continue?
Please.
Jason wants to give a few examples at the high school level.
What I might ask now, which we used to do and then I got away from it, can you write your questions down and then go back so we can get through the presentation? I think that some of your questions might be answered if we finish the presentation. Thank you. We'll collect them at the end. Pass them down.
There's some more from the package.
Go ahead, Ms. Singh.
You want to keep it? Okay.
Oh, Jason, okay.
Can you pass the packet over, please?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm going to fly through this pretty fast and not really in the method that I originally had planned. But for you members of the board and Dr. Garcia, I just kind of wanted to present an example of, a lesson that you might be able to see. And this is really maybe more tailored towards an upper middle school, 7th, 8th grade classroom, maybe a 9th grade classroom. It could also be extended, if done right, up into a calculus level room. But basically to show that there is simplicity behind all of this. When we talk about rigor, when we talk about these 8 standards of mathematical practice, if teachers step back from it, there is some simplicity in how we can approach how we engage our kids in our lessons and present these lessons. So what I was originally going to have you guys do is kind of be students in this, but we're going to kind of go through it kind of quick. But I want you to, you want to be a student?
No.
Go ahead.
No.
Okay. So I'll kind of flip. So this is a video called The Penny Pyramid. And this is a Guinness Book of World Records. This guy built a pyramid of pennies in his basement. So this is a 2-minute long video that, if done in a classroom, you would show students and you would give them the directions of absolutely no talking.
But go ahead and do the 2 minutes. I mean, I think it's good for them to get this part of it.
Okay.
Go ahead and show the video, please.
So that's three-dimensional, is that?
Yes. So what I'll ask you to do, follow the directions on here. Kind of be a student, somewhere on a piece of paper, no talking. And all I want you to do, and I'll just skip this.
It doesn't seem very collaborative, no talking.
Terrible, so I'm going to speak. So all I'll do is write down any questions and answers. Any questions at all. All right, so just really quickly, turn to a neighbor and compare what questions you came up with.
I was curious how many pennies in a row, how many pennies in a stack, how many pennies lengthwise, how many were deducted sideways, colors, right, did it matter? Because there was some color differentiation. Did the white markers mean something? Did that help adjust the size? Right, we're on the same page. There you go.
All right, so you guys exchanged some ideas, and bottom line is we could circle this as a class, talk about this for a couple minutes. we would have questions like how much money, how much does it weigh, how many pennies total, and then you got some more specific questions, how many pennies in a stack, some of that kind of stuff. But bottom line is if we want to know how much it weighs, how many pennies there are, how many dollars it is, all that, we're essentially asking one question: how many pennies are in this pyramid? So we got here, and now I would have kids, write down an estimate.
You are aware of the fact that they changed the composition of pennies.
Oh, you're one of those people that brings that up. 1987, they changed it from a different combination of zinc and copper.
That's right.
So the question is, how many of those were made before 1987 and after 1987? Now we get real specific. So then we would go through an estimation activity and have kids just kind of brainstorm what they think, and maybe ask them also, come up with a number you think is ridiculously too high and ridiculously too low. So that way we can create a window. We can exchange some conversation on that. Question?
I would take the area of each layer, like what the penny, like you look at the bottom, I can't see, let's say.
I haven't asked you how to solve it yet.
What?
I haven't asked you how to solve it
But
yet.
I want.
Well, there you go.
Everybody in class does not like you.
They never, no.
So,
You're trying to take my mic away.
So if we settle on that question, how many pennies are in a pyramid, then we can follow it up and talk about what more information do we need. And students can brainstorm that, have conversations, and we can come up with questions like Dr. Garcia was, how many pennies are in a stack, how many stacks are in a row on the base, or things like that. So what we're getting at, now taking off your student hat, putting on your educator hat. So first off, what stood out to how this problem of how many pennies in this pyramid, what stood out just to how it's been presented to you so far?
I think it was presented in a fun way, an engaging way.
So did I give you, we granted this really fast, and I kind of did, and as the teacher, we find that way to manipulate, but did I give you the question, the problem?
No.
You came up with it on your own. Have I asked you to do any math, yet?
No.
But have you been asked to think mathematically yet?
Yes.
So you were already going in your head of what information you need to solve, how we need to go about approaching this. So ideally in a classroom, we could get through this video, these conversation things in 10 minutes. And we framed this problem to where now I have students hooked. They want to know how to figure this out. They want to know how many pennies are there. But also I force them to not worry about doing math, but thinking mathematically. And that's one problem I think as older educated math teachers have the problem with is we're used to giving kids numbers and saying solve. The problem is you give kids numbers, they start solving. They don't think about what it is they're solving for. That's one step that some teachers need to take is that step back of let's not give numbers, let's present an issue, let's present a problem that we have to now start building a framework to. So the rest of these slides just kind of show how this lesson could progress. There's a bunch of different ways you could do this. But I would maybe take it to this level to where that I'm going to show you, basically let's start smaller. I'm going to show you an image of a pyramid that's made with little square Legos. And I'm going to put it up there for 10 seconds, and I want you to write down an estimate of how many Legos are in this much smaller pyramid.
Do you have the Legos to do that in your classroom?
Well, I don't in this year's classroom, but ideally a teacher would. So,
I have the answer.
Oops. So now I'd take it off. So we would maybe entertain.
We don't like you.
So we'd maybe have a conversation, entertain. So what is your estimate?
It's not an estimate, it's the answer.
Oh, it's the answer.
Oh, come
So
on.
41 and 9 is 50, 56.
Ooh, not quite.
No way.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. So bottom line is I brought this into framework. I made this smaller. I made this more approachable for the students. Yes, ma'am.
112.
No.
What? What did you say?
112.
But it's, okay.
So then we might break kids into groups, give them all a pyramid, all right? And first, they're obviously all going to start counting and trying to figure out how many are in this. But I would back that up, and obviously you can't deter them from doing it, but the purpose isn't this pyramid. The purpose is the pennies. So first we would make them summarize and characterize this pyramid, talk about the shapes of the layers, the number of layers, the dimensions of each base, and somehow write that out. This is what we would call standard mathematical practice 2, quantitative reasoning. All right, basically identifying what units they're working with and how everything relates to one another. So then we could say, okay, I want you to take apart your pyramid and build a model that breaks down each layer.
Oh, wow.
All right, and come up with how we could basically total out how many are in this pyramid.
So I doubled that, 55.
Oh, I just did my math wrong
See,
here.
because I
There
did
you go.
110,
Okay.
and I
41
doubled
and
that
9.
Yeah.
number.
Yeah.
And I
All
think
right.
you did the
55
same
is
with
what I
the
meant.
different, he did it, we did it the same way, but we used
can
a
see it
different
right there.
base. Because I did
My
55
work.
times 2
Yeah.
is 110.
So basically, as you're seeing here, we're doing very basic math. We're doing we're practicing that multiplication skill that ideally kids in 7th, 8th grade should have by now, but at least they're getting that little bit of fluency practice in here. And we're building out each layer. Bottom line is this is building a model. This is Standards Mathematical Practice 4, Modeling with Mathematics, and SMP 7, which is look for and use structure in mathematics. All right? So then we would maybe step back as a whole class and say, how can we abbreviate our findings and write this into an equation? We can maybe introduce the fact if we're working with squares, we can use that little 2 up there that we call squared. And kind of work together as a whole class, have that conversation. And this would be kind of showing us expressing regularity and reasoning, that we're seeing this pattern, 1 squared plus 2 squared plus 3 squared plus 4 squared plus 5 squared. And bottom line is to get to our penny, we would have to do that all the way up to, and this is the point where in time where I would give them one piece of information, that there's 40 stacks on a base. So we'd have to do this all the way up to 40. So then, as a teacher, I might guide this a little bit more, because this is where we're getting into the more complex algebra of showing this, but basically if we flip that and worked our way backwards, we could figure out any pyramid that we don't know the length of the base, we would call that n. And so what we essentially have is n squared plus n minus 1 squared plus n minus 2 squared, so on and so forth, till our last term would be n minus n squared, because 0 squared is 0. So we would build this out, talk about this in a class. This would be a section that there might be 5 to 7 minutes of kind of direct instruction. The teacher's kind of leading it, maybe fielding some questions, but getting us to this point. So then I can have students independently practice that and basically see if that model we built works. So this is where we're attending to precision. So if I said, take a pyramid with 3 layers, 4 layers, and 5 layers of your Legos, imagine that, use this formula and see if our little n squared plus n minus 1 squared plus n minus 2 squared, so on and so forth, works. And we would get 14, 30, and 55 for a pyramid of, respectively, of 3, 4, and 5. So if we went back to this piece of paper, we have 14, 30, and 55. So bottom line is we're just connecting dots. We're still doing a lot of fluency practice, basic math skill practice, but we're starting to look at this from an algebraic point of view. So lastly, going back to the teacher mode, I would present the kids with, ideas of how we could simplify this formula. Now, kids in a 7th, 8th grade classroom are not going to get to this. But in a calculus room, you might be able to challenge kids to get to this. So this is even something that can be brought up to a higher level. But we would talk about how some mathematicians before us have worked on proofs to solve certain things, and one individual came up with this summation of squares, basically, to find what we would call the volume of a pyramid, or how many pieces are in a pyramid. And we can use that formula here and practice our mode of substitution, substituting our value of 5 for our n's, and calculate out that this in fact works, 55. Now they have a tool they can use to figure out how many pennies. So I told them there was 40 stacks in the base on one side, so then they can calculate out that there are 22,140 total stacks of pennies, and then they'll run to me like Steve Wood, all happy and giddy, how many pennies are in a stack, and we would share that there's 13 pennies in a stack, and they would come up with there's 287,820 pennies in that pyramid. And then, so now we've persevered in solving problems, Standard Mathematical Practice 1. So in this one activity that, right now we're probably at the 40-minute mark, 45-minute mark, we have gone through all of these mathematical practice standards with the exception of 2. There's only 2 out of 8 that we didn't touch here.
And that last one, which wasn't the last one, but the last one on this page, the persevering in solving problems, I think is one of the most challenging.
Absolutely.
Because it's kind of built in where kids, it gets tough and they give up because they don't think they're smart enough. And it's not that they're not smart enough, they just haven't learned to persevere,
Yep.
right, to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Where did the,
Member Creel?
who got to keep the $2,878.20?
The person who had to replace the floor that it fell through.
There you go.
He did it in his basement, so it was his concrete slab. His concrete slab.
Really big pizza party?
Think of all of that.
And then if we wanted to extend it, whether an exit ticket homework or maybe, if this is the 7th grade, 8th grade level, this might be a more intense group activity in class, but now we can present them from a different angle. If you had 150 square Legos, like we started with our little one, how many layers tall would the biggest pyramid you can make be, and how many Legos would you have left over? So we could approach this formula and our whole process, and kids could go about different ways of solving this, and then again, we'll take them back through those practices of building models, of persevering in solving a problem. But bottom line is all this took was some Legos and some pieces of paper and a summation formula. It didn't it was pretty simplistic. It's pretty simple to build activities like this, but as teachers, we just have to kind of step out of our comfort zones a little bit and practice not just throwing numbers at kids, getting them to actually come up with some curiosity and some inquiry of their own to solving a problem, and then making sure that we're just scaffolding that problem in the process so that we can hit these different mathematical practices. So.
I also think, though, as we look at and we haven't looked at the data, so some of this is anecdotal, some of it's just observational, but my experience in watching math teachers, the more they understand their content, the easier they can teach it, right? And some of you maybe remember struggling, with calculus or trig, or even in college, maybe you had a grad student that was teaching. But those that really, really understand their content can explain things in a way that's much easier. And what concerns me as we look at what is required, fourth grade math, fifth grade, 6th, 7th, 8th, particularly in our K-8s, we have a lot of elementary certified teachers who are teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math. They're not math certified. And the math requirements have changed. It used to have 6 hours of math, and then it went back down to 3, and then it was 8, and now it's, I think, back down to 3. And so there is a concern of mine that perhaps because of what's being required, and I haven't looked at the data and I haven't looked at certification, this is just my intuition, so we really have to validate what the data show. But I wonder if part of our issue is that they don't have the foundational math content themselves for teaching mathematics, above 5th grade. And so it's particularly a concern of mine in the K-8s. Now, I'm not saying we don't have math certified people in K-8, but I think we also have a lot of elementary certified in K-8 because they're hard to find. And so it's something I think we need to look at, of how we want to restructure or how we departmentalize for those that are more comfortable with mathematics. And science, actually the same is true for science.
Vice President Cashman?
I would agree with you, Superintendent, but I think it needs to start before that age. Obviously, Jason is very excited about math, and it came across in that example, but I think you could see even in 1st grade, you have teachers that feel uncomfortable with math. We've talked about this, that maybe we need reading specialists and math specialists, and they all don't have to have a different certification, but if you're excited and you understand what you're doing, you're going to project that to the kids. If we have teachers that are scared of teaching phonics, which I would be one, that's why I don't like teaching that lower grade, but I would much rather teach math at the lower grades. And I think it shouldn't be a big shift. You probably could go into each one of our elementary schools and you could say to teachers, what do you feel most comfortable with? And if teachers feel most comfortable with math, then I think it would also avoid the problem of kids. You would have a vested interest in those kids. If you're the teaching math 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, you want those kids on level, because if you don't have them on level at 1st grade, you're going to have them at 2nd grade. You're going to have a much more connection with them, just like in reading. You know that you have to move these kids on, and I think we've got a lot of teachers that are trying extremely hard, but sometimes you have to. I've talked with a few people and they said, if I could only teach math, or if I could only teach science, or if I only could teach language arts, I would be very happy. Now we have some teachers that are great in every specialty, but I think even a test case for a few of our schools, we might say, well, what school wants to try that? I know a few schools are already moving a little bit, but to make a big effort, because we have this conversation all the time, we need to be moving that needle a lot faster. It concerns me that we've got kids that are in high school, and I'm sure you see them in your Algebra 1 class. We've already failed them. They can't do it, and if you're still struggling with basic functions, I don't care how exciting you make it, you can't get there. Or you can get there, but it's taking too long, and so you can't complete a curriculum and be proficient.
Board Member Garcia.
Thank you. I'll start from the back. First of all, thank you, Dr. Garcia, and your team that you guys have here. You guys, the passion that you guys.
Are you done with the presentation?
Presentation
Oh, yeah,
is
are you
not,
done?
presentation is not over.
So, Jason, were you finished?
I'm finished, yes.
So who's up next? Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
President Price, members of the board, thank you. I'll try to complete it very quickly. And I just wanted to summarize on a lot of questions have come up about our teachers and their skills at teaching math, and I will tell you that I'm starting to see change in our schools, and I do believe teachers can be coached up, is what we're calling it, and we do professional development for all of our instructional coaches in every school, and we also provide professional development for our principals so that they, when they go into the classroom, they know what they're looking for. As you saw today, ideas of what you looked at when you saw that video, that's what we show our principals. We teach about engagement, and because what the achievement data shows us is that students that are engaged at a high quality of learning, that they're going to achieve faster and higher. So the professional development that I have listed up here are things that we've been doing this year. But especially if you look at, for instance, instructional strategies for engagement and higher order thinking and interventions for those kids that have gaps in their proficiency, we're building those, we're going to have K through 12 maps by this summer. We started last summer with high school, we moved into middle school, we're ending with elementary, and we'll be working some more with elementary this summer. From that point, and even toward the end of this year, what we'll start doing, as you see the curriculum maps, now we can start building lesson plans. I know Jason, if we had more time, could talk to you about the building of the curriculum maps last summer with Santa Fe High and Capitol High together, and they've already started building the formative assessments with that, so they've taken it now and they're just making it richer, and then they can start building their lesson plans. A lot of what we need to do on coaching teachers up again is helping them just learn the strategies, and you can't just do PD, you have to circle around. There's all kinds of research that shows if you don't circle around with coaching, it ain't going to stick. So we've got to keep coaching, and we have to keep coaching and giving professional development to them as well.
Ms. Though, on that point, though, what % of our teachers really have been trained? Because I think we are limited with funding. We are limited with the amount of professional development days. Professional development is usually something that gets cut. I know that we restructured to try to put more, but what % of the teachers do you think you've touched this year in math?
Well, there's no way I can touch all hundreds of them myself.
So that's what I think is
we're doing
important
it
that we
through
know.
our coaches, for
Right,
instance.
but they're not all coming in,
Right.
getting the training. We just don't have the funding to do that.
Right.
And so we have to scaffold it, and we could say, well, let's build it in the budget. When you see how expensive it is, because you have to have a sub for each time they're out, or you have to pay a stipend if it's going to be in the summer, it is a staggered approach. I think the instructional coaches help, but I think it's also, we have a long ways to go in being able to train all of the teachers, because they don't all come to us with this background.
Board Member Carrillo.
To what extent is this being taught at the university level? Because, I mean, so often these these young adults or whoever will come out of, they'll have their, they're a Master of Ed, and they're not prepared.
It varies by university, right, Sherry?
Yes, Dr. Garcia, President Price, and the board. It does vary on the program. The alternative licensure program doesn't even teach math for the child. So they're not even teaching our teachers how to teach math. So if they come from a traditional educational program, then they'll get that kind of.
But the alternative licensure, which has really been pushed a lot, the alternative licensure that's also been pushed a lot by this administration, we have a lot of people that may not have that training, that are licensed.
As a product of the alternative certification program, zero math-related instruction, or really any specificity except for some focus on reading and reading comprehension and language arts. Other than that, science, math, nothing is covered in alternative certification programs.
Vice President Cashman?
Well, I'm a real strong supporter of professional development, and I'm glad we're doing it. But and we've talked about this, but I think it needs to be said again. One of the big problems in math or in reading is curriculum adoption. I went to this Math Amigo workshop, and I looked at how many curriculums, just those teachers. You cannot do professional development if every school is using a different curriculum. Our kids are moving around, our teachers are moving around. I think it's great to give a lot of choice to the teachers in the classroom, but on the curriculum that we spend millions of dollars on, that should be something that either the board directs the superintendent or, something that we've got to get that under control.
And we did move in that direction this year, because I know that the previous philosophy was a lot more site-based. It doesn't make sense for curriculum adoption and the various curricula that are out there, particularly for the core content area. So this year, Ms. Sink and Sherry, what did you guys do
Board
for
President
that?
Price, Vice President Cashman, it's exactly what we've done. Last year was the English Language Arts adoption, but as I told you already in previous presentations, that not every school chose to adopt it. And many just had the boxes sitting there when I got here last year. So what we did is started giving, and this is where we did touch K through 6 teachers who wanted to come to learn the very basics of ReadyGen, which was the adoption. We moved in literally hundreds of people in the summer, which was really fantastic. And in fact, we ended up having schools that said, can you come back and do more? And so we sent people back, and in the Friday afternoons, for instance, we did more professional development just to teach them how to use ReadyGen. And now your whole district, except for I think 2 schools, they have both, but Lucy Calkins, but the whole district is now using, as far as elementary, K6 is using ReadyGen. We also adopted, for the year that I'm here now, we had a social studies adoption. We have all high schools did the same well, there's only 2 high schools, but the 2 high schools adopted the same thing in social studies, whether it was U.S. history or world history, whatnot. And then what we adopted for middle school social studies was, and they had different ones that we as a team vetted first, and then we gave out, and you know that the state vets it all first, right? Then we vet it, and then of what we think is, in our philosophy, what we think is best. And so we put it down to about 3 different programs that the teachers then started looking at for this middle school social studies, and they picked Discovery Ed, which was something that we also adopted in APS as well, because it is so kind of like this class was today that you got to see from Jason. It's all activity kind of things and lots of great lessons, and all tied to Common Core, so very exciting things. But back to your question, that's our goal. Math, the next adoption coming up is science, and so that's being worked on right now. There's panels of teachers working on that with PED to start looking, with the next gen science standards. It's going to be really fun to have the next textbook, so we're excited about it.
I remember when you promised that to us last year, that you would clean this up. I appreciate that you're doing it.
Trying.
Vice President Cashman.
So I know sometimes is the board directing you, but I'm just going to put out to my other board members, I think that as a board, we need to move and direct the superintendent that we want the same curriculum throughout the district. I think whatever that curriculum is, I'm not here to make that decision, but I rely on your staff. But it does bother me that we have a lot of mobility in our district, and so a kid starts off here, mid-year his parents move to a different part of town or a different apartment complex, and he or she shows up at school and it's not continuous. And so I would like to know, and I know it's expensive, but I also know there are partners out there in the community that are very concerned about math. What would it take for us, I mean, you know, because we go through cycles, what would it take for us to get all of our math curriculum back on track and not have a lot of different curriculums out there? So our, you know.
So I want to talk to that. What if, again, this is where I want to make sure that I bring something back to the board, that we have a policy, if this is a direction the board wants to go, on uniform curricula. And that doesn't mean that people can't adjust, but it's cost effective in terms of we get more bang for the buck. We get more bang for the buck on professional development. And it's something that we had done when I was here the first time, and then, you know, trends change. But it really does make more sense to have a basic standard curriculum for each particular content area. So I don't think that it'll work like this. I think that it's something that we will bring back as a policy recommendation, and then you all can think about it and hear the pros and cons. I'm sure you'll hear from your constituents that may think it's the worst idea that could ever happen. The second piece is to find out what it would take to align math and look at math content. I know we have a lot of partners in the community that want to help us with mathematics, so it's something that I think we can look at perhaps as another strategy in the strategic plan of looking at, as we look at raising math proficiency, looking at what it would, doing an analysis of what it would cost us to go with one adoption, and see if we could find outside funding for that.
I just want you to always watch out during your English curriculum for Act 3 of Macbeth. If they don't have the drunken guard, don't adopt that book. Thank you.
I won't forget that.
Go read it.
Ever.
Go read it. He's having issues with his alcohol consumption and what it does to certain parts of his body. Okay. Thank you very much for your present. Please talk into your mic.
For coaching, how many coaching staff are you guys? 3, 10, 20? Just.
President Price, members of the board, Board Member Garcia, we have pretty much an instructional coach in every school, and then we have 3 district instructional coaches that are out helping first-year teachers, and by law we have to mentor first-year teachers, and then they're also helping struggling teachers. So we'll get calls from the principals and say, can I have an instructional coach come and work with this teacher? I would really like to have some more instructional coaches, but it'll all be based on budget.
We also are looking at the model because they're used in different ways in different schools. And I'm worried about mission creep in that in some schools they may be used as quasi-administrators. And so I think we're really looking philosophically, do we pull those back at the district level and deploy them in teams or, you know, high need, et cetera. So it's going to be a push and pull between the district and the schools, and, you know, the parameters for how they're being used. And it's something that you probably will hear from the union, that they don't feel that they're being used appropriately. And then sometimes I have to say the union is right. I mean, I think that there are some places where they're not. They might get called to be test coordinators, or they might be called to fill in when the principal's gone, and any number of things, and that's not the intent with the instructional coaches.
Yes, we've heard those concerns before, and some being used for evaluations, and you're not going to talk to a coach that you think is evaluating it.
So my second question actually is, I think the walkthroughs, that's really great. That's really great that you walk through and you actually make sure that the whatever you guys are teaching and coaching is actually happening. That's actually great. The working results, how does the board figure out, or the community figure out that it's actually working? Does it take 2 or 3 years for a grade, or just forever? Do we have some sort of way to monitor that? Just actually, so kind of going off of this stuff is kind of how we're doing it, how it will work.
President Price, members of the board, we'll be using our map data. We'll be using our park data. I talk about that. I think there's data. So you've got to look at your data. The schools look at their data too, all the time, and they use their PLCs, professional learning communities, where teachers and grade levels get together once a week at least, and they work together on the data of each child. So what's really wonderful coming up is the name of the test for K3 in reading. So iStation right now is what teachers use in K3 to test on how you're reading fluency or phonics or whatever. You're getting tested on that 3 times a year. Well, they're coming up with the same thing in math for those young grades, and we haven't had really anything in math in young grades. I know that's not the perfect test, but we've not had one. So and that's for us then to look at district level. So teachers will have their own assessments, and they'll, be checking kids on their leveled reading, if you will, but we don't have a way to look at it, so K3. So we'll have that now to start assessing. That's going to be exciting.
Great. Then also, let's see here. I just think the way you got the board engaged in what you guys were doing, it looked like everybody's back in 3rd or 4th grade.
Would you please speak into your mic?
It looks like the way you got the board engaged, the way you guys were talking about it, it seems like everybody was back in the 3rd and 4th grade and having a great time with learning. And that was pretty good. So the way you can attract a kid or fish a kid in, that's totally awesome in my opinion. I would like to see somehow with the superintendent or the board, as Maureen said, what's our long goal? What's our long-term plans in the next 3 or 5 years with this? If we can come up forward with it, and
that's the strategic plan, sir.
Right.
So I'm not going to talk about it today.
That's fine. But as long as we have it done and as long as it's moving forward, because everybody sometimes has great ideas and also it just stops. But I think this is an awesome idea. Then the last thing is the passion that you guys have that you're showing here, what you guys are doing with Dr. Garcia's team here. This is just great. It kind of gives me chills, and I think it's great that you guys are moving, or the school district is moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Garcia.
Vice President Cashman.
Thank you for the presentation. I've got a couple of comments. I'd like, and I see out in the audience some people that gave a teacher training session to our 4th through the 6th grade, the Math Amigos. It was very well received, very well attended. It was nice that they had gone out and obtained a grant, so they paid for those teachers to come for from like 8 to 2, fed them, and so I think that was really great. I stayed for the whole training. Some of the things that concerned me, and again, it was happening when I was teaching. Again, you know that I do believe there are some basic key fundamentals in math that you need to know. Conceptually, I believe, place value, number sense, our kids don't have that, and then we keep on moving them along, and then it's just confusing. It's hard for our parents because we have a lot of parents that don't want to touch math either. But somehow we have to change, and somehow, in order to get to that higher level thinking, our kids need some base. I know you're telling me you're working on the math tables and the addition tables and all of that, but it breaks my heart to see anybody in our middle schools and our high schools that don't know those basic facts. I just can't imagine how you can teach anything higher level. So somehow we've got to, just like we talked about at our board retreat, the laser focus needs to be on those younger grades to get them that it just becomes like your name. And there are many tools out there that we can do, and unfortunately not all of them are the most exciting things, but you have to learn them, just like you need to learn how to tie your shoe some point in your life, because
Velcro.
I know, but there's not always Velcro for everything. And so eventually our kids need to learn that. One of the things at that Math Amigos training that I was a little surprised at, I mean, it was definitely higher level math, but I understand that we had that the high schools were approached on these math circles, and they said, no, there's math competitions. We need to be engaging in that with our kids. We need to start those math circles down at our elementary levels where they're given a problem. I mean, it's fun, it's given a problem, but it really makes you stretch your mind. I mean, the circle that I attended, the training, I was lost. I mean, you did a great job, but I was lost. And I thought, oh my gosh, but this was for at fourth grade level, fourth through sixth.
Are you smarter than a fourth grader?
No, I'm not. I have that game. I was smarter than a fifth grader. But somehow, you know, if our kids are competing, like, you know, I understand there are math competitions, just like we do spelling bees. And I know some of our history teachers do that geography bee. We need to be competing in those math things up at UNM and getting our kids.
And I think they do in varying levels. You know, part of the problem is, you know, we can't mandate necessarily that teachers will engage in those competitions. I mean, we have some that compete in coding. We have some that, you know, compete at the high school level. We have it's varying degrees. I think we can do a lot to nurture and encourage. But I think in terms
I would definitely say we should be encouraging very strongly, even if it's math clubs at our schools. I mean, we know, you know, and I'm going to talk about this in a budget issue, but we know that for our kids to have high-paying, good jobs, they're in the STEM fields. Not that you can't get high-paying, good jobs managing a hotel or anything, but a lot of basic entry-level jobs, and you know, so, and somehow we have to, you know, and I know Linda, Miss Sink is going to say, oh, she's going again, but we need to light a fire under our kids because we don't have future generations to waste. You know, when they go to the community college or to UNM or out of state, and they don't have, and most colleges are using an ACT score. They're not caring what you got in Algebra 1. Where did you score? Are you ready? You know, they've got cutoffs, and our kids aren't making the cutoffs.
And the new gateway actually is Algebra 2. You know, Algebra 1 really, and that's part of the reason that we wanted kids exposed to Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, where we said you have to at least offer it in 8th grade or in middle school, because Algebra 2 really is a new gateway. But you know, we are looking at multiple strategies. You know, those math nights at school, particularly at the elementary level, can be a lot of fun, and it engages the kids and the parents, and again, gives them ideas about how to, you know, so we'd like to see more of that. But again, people are giving of their time to do that. It would be nice to be able to compensate them. So as we look at our plan, and part of what we look at, and we've been, you know, you got to start. We've been working hard to build relationships with our community. And we have. And then the second stage is, okay, where are we moving with our strategic plan? And then there are a lot of people out there that are looking at, okay, now what are you doing? We might be interested in funding this piece. We might be interested in helping you fund that piece. And so, you know, this is, last year was a building year, my first year here, in really building relationships in the district and out in the community. Now we're building this strategic plan. We'll be moving into, of course, the attributes of the graduate, getting more feedback of how do we concretize that. And so there's, you know, multiple irons in the fire, but we hear you, and we do want to work towards it. There is not going to be the funds that, no matter how much you want to prioritize, the little bit that we got, we have to really put towards compensation. A lot of that's mandated. There isn't going to be a whole lot of extra money to do more programs or more training. So we have to be very strategic in how we build our plan, and then how we work with community partners, look at grants. You know, we're on it, and I think, you know, we all are in agreement. I heard a couple of things that are policy recommendations that we will come back, because I think if these things are important to you, you want them institutionalized, whether I'm here or not. That it is in policy, because if not, it won't happen. It might happen for a few years, and then it'll go away.
And just to follow on to that, I know that, you know, a lot of times when we think we have people out in the community that want to help us, and everybody thinks, oh, tutor. Okay, you can tutor for us. We have a lot of brain power, especially in the math and the science areas. And sometimes these people don't want to be in teaching in our schools. They want to help us at this higher level. What is that strategic plan? Let us bring our expertise. And sometimes I don't think we're tapping into that. We shouldn't be afraid of saying we need help, and we don't all have the answers. Let us reach out and bring in some of those people. We can say to them too, thank you very much, but you're going in a different direction than what we as a district, but we need to engage those people. I mean, you know, we've got the highest level of PhDs in the country, at, 30, 40 miles up the road, and a lot of them live here in Santa Fe. And we need to be engaged, and they want to be engaged.
And they're like on the advisory, I mean, you want to talk about the partner, go back and
Yes.
look at the strategic partnerships.
We are engaging with a lot of those people. And when we do the volunteer recruitment, there's a whole level of ways that people can become engaged. And even the naysayers, we have some people in the community that are real mad at us right now, and we're meeting with them too. And so we really do try to do that, Ms. Cashman, and we can show you documentation where we are. Can we do better? Of course. And then, of course, you get to a critical mass where can get too big when you're doing this sort of planning. But, I mean, if we look at the composition of the math advisory, I would like to see the math advisory be more robust, and perhaps it could be co-led for maybe if staff can't always convene, that maybe some of these people that you're talking about can help us. And LADL has been a tremendous partner, both in math and in science.
I just want to point out that just because you have a PhD doesn't mean you can teach.
And that's why I think, and I would say, and he'll kill me when I get home tonight, I wouldn't want my husband teaching math in the elementary school. He's fine over at the community college, and he did teach over at the high school, but at the elementary. And so I'm not just saying PhD makes you a teacher.
Of course
but
it doesn't.
It doesn't. And we all know that because there are different skills, but we do need to
Maybe a
try
PhD in education.
But well, not necessarily either, I mean, but we need to try to use what we have a very rich community, and I know our teachers, every teacher in our classroom and every one of our staff want to do the best they can, but we need to give them the tools, we need to give them the training, and it's that, as you said, that repeated training, not just 3 hours, okay, now that's not working, because I went in and I saw a lot of that next gen, and it was still shrink wrapped, and then I went to the teachers that had been there and I said, and I see that with, the Cuisinart rods or the base 10 things. You see tubs of them, and they're out there to be picked up in the trash. And so I hope we're changing that dynamics, because kids, especially at the younger level, but even at the high school level, if they can be engaged with something, a lot of our kids are very visual, not auditory learners. So, but I know you're working hard, but like I said, let's try to move the needle faster.
Board Member Price?
Rita Dove, who was Poet Laureate for the United States, only the second black Poet Laureate. I'm going to bring in the poem for Board Member Carrillo. She wrote a wonderful poem about flashcards. I'm going to make a copy for you and bring it in. I'll make you a copy too. And you too? No. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What do you mean, no? But poetry hurts you?
No, I probably couldn't read it.
I'll bring him a copy. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little punch drunk over here.
So,
go ahead.
Just really quick, can somebody introduce the couple in the audience who actually, are you the ones that applied for the grant and helped out with the math and the teaching? I haven't met them, so I apologize. So just if somebody could just introduce them.
I'm James Taylor. I'm with the Math Amigos group that ran that workshop. Ready to attend.
Thank you. Thank you for
one of the activities.
Yeah. Thank you what you all do for the kids community. Totally appreciate it from my heart. Thank you.
And we've been working very closely with Ms. Bickley.
Yeah, Ms. Bickley, yeah.
Dr.
Bickley.
Dr. Bickley has helped us with ECO. She helped us now with math. A whole variety of things that the
Thank you so much.
We're very grateful that you're working so hard on math, and as you were alluding to, we feel there's so much potential to bring resources to the district to move faster. There's a lot of untapped resources, for example, the business community. So we understand that you all are just on total overload. Everybody is doing about 5 jobs. But I think there are a number of people in the community that could work for you to go out and tap these extra resources. When you meet, Linda has kindly said, she's looking at partners, and so is Dr. Garcia. But I think some of the partners can really amplify what you want. And we want our kids, there's so many of us out there, we want every single child to be competent in math and get those jobs, get the best jobs in Santa Fe and the best jobs in New Mexico, not necessarily move off to elsewhere.
Yes.
And I can tell you that we've been working with our various partners, whether it's this group, the communities and schools that we're writing grants to provide more support to our kids. There's been a lot of relationship building. As I said, you got to build the foundation, where they feel comfortable coming to talk to me and telling me inconvenient truths and back and forth. We've developed that. But the second piece was where we are on the strategic plan so that we can prioritize what are the most high leverage activities so that we can go to the community with a coherent plan and say, all right, here are some options. What resonates with your mission or that you are interested in supporting? Or is there a hole in our plan that you would recommend? Because a strategic plan should be a living document that we keep updating and there's a reiterative process.
Sir?
Yeah, my name is John Chavez. I'm probably known as the local math critic.
Yes.
I was at Capitol High School today. What I saw there and what I see in the classroom is very different than what I'm hearing here. And it's not good news. So I will be meeting with Dr. Garcia very shortly. I'm not sure if Ms. Wendian will be there or not.
She will be there.
Okay. There are problems in River City here, big ones. 90% of the Capitol High School graduates end up in remedial math, either at community college or UNM. There are hardly any that score above a C+ on the ACT test. I asked that question today at Capitol. I was told there's none. We have some major remediation and repair to do in both the system and with the students. I'm focused on the students.
And if I've brought this to the board. We have single-digit proficiency. On the other hand, we have students that are getting scholarships and doing very well. So there's a disconnect somewhere with the data. But I agree with you. That was my first alarm with you all my first year here. How can we possibly have single-digit proficiency at our high schools? And so, I get that. Now, are we making progress? I don't think we can change it overnight. I think we're going to find some very similar concerns, and I appreciate that you work with our kids and sharing your perspective with us. I look forward to meeting with you.
Thank you.
Tutoring on a regular basis, both private school and public school and throughout the districts, mostly middle school and above. I will say that the data that I'm referring to and the data that I'm disseminating comes from Public Education Department, SFPS District, UNM, and Santa Fe Community College.
Thank you, sir.
It's good data.
Thank you for your input.
Okay.
Ms. Sink?
I will say that the K through 6
Sir?
is very good.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sink?
President Price, I just wanted to end by saying, coincidentally, that Board Member Garcia kind of jumped the gun on me because I feel, no, I'm really glad you did because I'm getting to do it and say it again is Lynn Bickley and I will actually be working on a grant together. We're going to start working on it this week. And I do appreciate her help and other people that are coming to us and helping us. And as we do walkthroughs, we see scientists in the classroom. Elementaries, they come in and they help with the LANL group, also helps us get tutors in that are scientists.
I don't know if you want to mention that too, but when I walk into classrooms and I see these, a lot of times it's men for some reason, they really like tutoring or helping our kids. I love it, scientists. And it's very exciting. And you know that we had a lot of help from Lannel. But Lynn Bickley's helping me because, can you imagine, I want to have, for 2 weeks, I want to have elementary principals in working in math and giving a lot of workshops and practice and writing lesson plans for 2 weeks. Can you imagine how much that's going to cost to get a teacher in? Because you've got to pay them, otherwise they've got to go do their second job in the summer. So Lynn and I are working on that. She's going to get other people to help, and I just want to thank her again. It really does help to have people in our community, and I've never seen a community like this that people want to help so badly. I'm usually having to go out and beg. I haven't had to do that. They come to us, so it is exciting, and so I just wanted to say that. And everything I've told you here tonight is true and correct, and what we are trying to do is make a difference and try to build a better system, build curriculum maps that we think are rich, and start having teachers trained to where they're coached up to doing even a better job. So we're not going to give up. We're going to work hard. Thank you for letting us present tonight.
All right, moving on to board discussion and possible action. Is there any board discussion? Okay.
I would just like to make a note that for the next board meeting next week on Tuesday, I'd like to have an item that is called staff recognition, and I'll talk about that more. But staff recognition.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You want it under board discussion? Yeah. Okay. Board Member Garcia? No. Board Member Carrillo?
Since the Secretary Designate of Education refuses to get a background check and doesn't have one and has been in that position for a really long time, I think that somebody out there, not me, should file something in court preventing him from going to any of our public schools. Because he doesn't have a background check, the same one we require for everyone, he doesn't have and he won't get. So he doesn't want to. So I think there should be an injunction preventing him from going to any public schools in New Mexico until he gets it.
He hasn't been vetted?
What?
He hasn't been vetted?
Well, I mean, HR probably did some rudimentary vetting, but he hasn't gone through a background check like all of us have had to do. That's all.
Oh, I didn't get the paper. Okay. Is there anything for advanced planning? Any changes in advanced planning? Then by the powers vested in me by whomever, we are adjourned.